Hello all, good morning. Welcome to the second day of the Unicaf Master Conference. Today, we will move on to different fields of expertise of the Unicaf School of Education, Humanities and Social Sciences. We have 3 sessions today and 2 plenary presentations. We will be starting with the first plenary presentation, which is Dr. Ruth Flaherty, who is a senior lecturer in the School of Social Sciences and Humanities of the University of Suffolk, and she will be delivering her presentation on authorship and AI creativity, copyright law, and large language models. This will be followed by our first session for the day, which is on the discipline of law, chaired by Mr. Christos Konstantis, a program leader within the school. During this session, we have 4 presentations. We will begin with Eunice Shilagiru, talking about the effectiveness of international law in preventing and punishing sexual violence as a weapon of war. Then we will continue with Oluwapelumi Mofoluwawo and their presentation on balancing the competing interests of humanitarian intervention and state sovereignty, lessons from Libya. The third presentation is by Lukman Raimi, and the topic is examining the relevance and adequacy of the Outer Space Treaty as an international legal instrument for space tourism entrepreneurship, a systematic literature review. While for this session, the last presentation is by Audrey Bridget, with the presentation focusing on how diverse are corporate boards. Following a break, we are going to be moving to our second session of the day, chaired by Mr. Christos Damianou, academic coordinator and program leader here within the school. The second session is focused on the discipline of criminology. We have 2 presentations. The first by Ivan Nichols, focusing on the decriminalization of cannabis in Trinidad and Tobago, an analysis of the impact of the criminal justice system. While the second one is by Sharon Onshwari, and the topic of the presentation is utilization of the diversion program in reducing institutionalization among juvenile offenders in Kenya. Then our last session for today is chaired by Dr. Ioanna Kogiatri, a program leader within the school. We have 3 presentations within the topics of psychology and mass communications. We begin with Prescott Chipezayani, focusing on local mainstream television coverage of Cyclone Fred in Malawi. Then Elizabeth Arek-Besola will be presenting on the impact of teachers' psychosocial well-being on the transition of schools into learning communities. And last, Nahid Akhter will be presenting on how school-based mindfulness programs influence the psychological well-being of the school-going children in Qatar. We will be closing the second day of the conference with our 4th plenary presentation and second of the day by Mr. Wes Nolan, who is a program leader for the Liverpool Screen School at Liverpool John Moores University, presenting Time to Ponder, Transformation in First-Generation Creative Industry Students. With no further ado, let's go to our first speaker of the day, which is Dr. Ruth Flaherty.
So this morning, I'd like to talk to you about authorship and AI creativity, mostly with a focus on copyright law, but I am going to be using patent law where applicable to show a sort of well-rounded approach to how IP looks at this problem. The first thing to ask, I suppose, is what we think creativity is. What is it that we are trying to protect? Should we be prioritizing human creativity over the creativity of these AI large language models. Can these large language models even actually be creative? Human creativity has several definitions across different schools of study, sociology, audience studies, as well as law. Things like one of the most important yet least understood of all of the intellectual abilities. Having said that, there are several definitions, as you'll see on screen. Things like novelty, so the newness is really important here to Bowden. Novelty with an attached value, so not just novelty for novelty's sake, but with value. And we'll look at how that comes into play when we look at patent law in a minute. Problem solving or investment as a method of judging human creativity. The fact that as humans, when we are creative, we are sacrificing something else in order to invest in creating an artistic work. And of course, investment is probably not true for AI. AI itself doesn't have a life outside of it. It's a program. It doesn't have a job to go to. It doesn't have to, put food on the table, so to speak, which of course is one of the sacrifices that human creators face. In comparison, therefore, if we look at AI creativity, it has been argued that AI systems are increasingly mimicking human creativity, but it's also been argued that these things are still tools. These still are just automations. They are programs. It is no more than the old-fashioned music boxes of old that used to have, with the tubes that circle round and catch on a sort of musical instrument. That AI creativity is less than a magic wand, so to speak, if you want to use Harry Potter speak. So with that said then, with these ideas, we know that IP law, what is there, is designed to protect creativity. That is one of the ideas behind it. It is there to protect innovation. It is there to protect the economic incentive to create. It does this in two ways, as you can see on screen. I have mostly focused at the start on copyright, because that, of course, is what the talk is being based in. What we are looking for here, when we're looking at intellectual property law protecting creativity, is for an original literary, dramatic, artistic, or musical work, i.e. books, plays, arts, or artistic craftsmanship. So works of artistic craftsmanship might be fabrics, might be chairs, might be any number of things, or musical works. And musical works is where a lot of focus of this at the moment of research is sitting. I don't know how many of you use Spotify, for example, or Amazon Music or similar streaming services, but there's been a lot of talk in the press lately about how much of the music on Spotify is actually AI generated, is no longer original works. It is covers and AI generated productions. Because of course the benefit for Spotify is that if they've generated those, they don't have to pay to license somebody else's work. The downside, of course, for that, if we're looking at creativity of authors, of human authors, is that it is, in theory, competing with the market for creative works created by humans. People may end up listening on Spotify, especially, to AI-generated music instead of music generated by humans. And so musical works can be protected by copyright, but there is a lot of pressure on that area of copyright at the moment for whether or not we should be allowing AI works to have their own copyright, and whether or not AI works are indeed infringing. If we're looking at how copyright law protects creativity, we should look at how copyright law defines creativity in relation to those LDMA works, literary, dramatic, musical, and artistic works. The UK law historically has followed the EU law, although, of course, post-Brexit, who knows what that's going to do going forward. But it is looking for an author's own artistic choice, or what is defined as skill, labour and judgment from cases such as InfoPack and Painter. This implies, of course, that we do need a human creator to begin with, because can an AI ever have its own skill, its own judgment? At the moment, I think all of the technology that we have, all of the knowledge we have, would say that it has not yet reached that level of self-awareness. I think from the most recent research, they're saying that somewhere around 2035 is when they're expecting these large language models, these AIs, to have achieved that level of skill. It might be sooner, of course, but at the moment, large language models as they stand do not reach that level. Copyright law does allow for some computer-generated works. The CDPA, the UK copyright legislation, does actually permit for computer-generated and computer-owned works. It's just the other tests do not permit for it at the moment. So as I say, once AI does achieve that level of self-awareness, there's nothing else in the CDPA that would stop it. This is in comparison to inventions, innovative inventions, i.e. science, technology. IP law in this area looks for novelty and inventive step, looks for something that is new and also that shows some intellectual spark. And it is that intellectual spark that really requires a human to be a creator here. And we know from Thaler in 2021 and the associated cases that currently in the UK, in terms of inventiveness, in terms of products and services for a patent, we do require a human creator. And that's an interesting distinction because, as I say, for artistic works, there is no, in theory, legislative prevention of AI creativity yet, other than that the tests seem to imply authorship from humanity in the moment. IP law is trying to, as I say, protect an incentive to create by ensuring that creators have control over their works, have control over the market in copies or in reproductions of their own work, at least for a while. Patents, of course, in the UK last for 20 years. Copyright law, of course, lasts for a lot longer. And it's about being able to make money from your products one-to-one. And this is an assumption about creativity that is really based in humanity. Because, of course, as I said, partly this is based in the idea of an opportunity cost of creativity. And it's partially based on an idea that finance, that being able to sell your product is the incentive to create. And of course, an AI program, once it achieves its own inventiveness, its own novelty, its own artistic choices, won't have those levels of, or those same responses to the market that humanity will. This isn't actually technically a new area of law. AI has been seen as this massive new thing. And in some areas it is. I mean, the way that we use it, it is. But of course, AI has been around for quite some time. It's just getting bigger, better, and faster. And indeed, the idea of non-human creators is not a new idea for intellectual either, to be fair. I don't know how many of you recognize the creature on screen. Some of you may or may not have seen this story. It was big for a while when it happened, although it was quite a while ago now. It was the monkey selfie case. And it shows that IP law historically has attempted to engage with the idea of non-human creators, but not terribly well. As I say, copyright itself, the test for copyright for originality, for example, assumes human authorship, although, as I say, doesn't necessarily ban non-human authorship. You can see this in the monkey selfie case, where you had a camera that was set up in an environment and was left in the environment where these apes were, and the ape took the picture. So there was no human involved at all, other than in setting up the camera. And there's a strong analogy to be made here between the level of work to set up an AI to create something, for example, where you do have to have a human start something, but then, of course, the AI, like in that case, takes on the technology and creates something artistic. And that case was the first time that we had this idea of, well, what do we do when something non-human creates something? And it showed that the law was really not set up to do it. Interestingly, that case didn't actually end up leading to any precedent, because it never actually ended up inside a courtroom. It was settled outside of court in the end, partially because the money that was involved ended up being donated to animal charities. So it's not terribly helpful from a precedent setting standpoint, except for the fact that it shows that at that point, IP wasn't terribly well handled, well designed to handle this idea of a creator that was not human, in effect, that was not, you know, somebody based in you or I, in fact. We really do need a person who made these authorial choices, or this idea of inventiveness, this inventive step. So for IP law at the moment, what we're looking for is someone involved who we can give authorship to. So that is usually, for copyright law, that is usually the person that opts into the AI. That is usually the person that creates either the literary output or the art output, if you're using things like Stable Diffusion. The issue is that this is a completely separate point to the infringement point, because this means that you can have somebody that has created something in AI, but that AI output may very easily infringe the copyright in the original work, in the work that it has been trained on. And so finding the person who is a human creator, if you will, that's using the AI might very easily also then lead to that person being sued for copyright infringement themselves. Because, of course, a copy of any original work does infringe copyright. So these AI models tend to be being claimed as infringing the copyright in the underlying work that they're trained on. We haven't had much case law on this at the moment, but that's where we're at the moment. And that's the risk of being found as this person is entering the information, who may then be found liable for infringement. Stability AI is the defendant in a UK case that is going to court at the moment. There aren't that many going to court in the moment in the UK. Mostly the cases are being held in the US, and there is a long stream of cases waiting to be heard in the US about this. And this is the problem at the moment, is that everybody's waiting to see what these cases do, because there are two questions here: whether or not AI itself can attract copyright and patent as a thing, whether it can itself be an author. The problem is most of the programs that use it are in some way infringing creativity, infringing somebody else's, some human's creativity at the moment. And that's where we're at the moment with IP law. We are waiting with bated breath for those cases to be heard. First of all in the US, and then, of course, the Getty and Stability AI case in the UK. And that will start setting precedent as to whether these programs are actually infringing copyright. I suspect that they are, and I suspect that they really ought to be using a license. But also whether any of these things can ever attract inventiveness, whether as programs themselves they can ever actually get that far. There are, however, separate to that, some other issues with AI creativity that I think really should come into play here when we're talking about this, where the main literature is talking more about creativity and the copying issue. I have some wider issues with AI creativity that I think really need to be taken into account when we look at the legislation. Things like bias. these programs, Stability AI, ChatGPT, some of these others that you might have heard of, the problem is most of them are based in, are created by companies based in the US, or at least based in the global West. And the problem with that is that the training data they are being trained on has an inherent bias, because this is being trained mostly on American English products. And so that means that the training data is biased, and therefore the entire program may end up being biased. And this could have issues with creativity as a whole if these products take over the internet, as they seem to be doing at the moment, where there are a lot of creative works on the internet at the moment. The fear is that they are being created in these free or low-cost AI programs. And so we are going to flood the market with what might end up being very biased data, in effect. There's also a wider moral issue here. Humanity has certain morals and has certain limits to what it will allow to be created. Obviously, an AI program on its own will not. And I suspect that if we do eventually allow for AI in some way and promote AI, copyright, etc., patents, etc., we will also have to have some safety or some moral legislation baked in, because otherwise you are going to see some, and we're already seeing AI doing some rather immoral activities. For example, being used to bring back to life and reanimate people who have already died. So you have obviously the two characters on screen from Star Wars. Both of their actors have been reanimated using AI. And I know that there was in the press this week, for any of you that do watch nature programs, David Attenborough had his awareness, his personality recreated on AI. And Stephen Fry, of course, who famously read the Harry Potter audiobooks, had his voice taken by AI and regenerated. And this can create some real difficulties with knowing what it is we're watching, who it is we're listening to. These things can somewhat be covered at the moment by current laws on things like passing off, where we're talking about tort law and the protection of personality rights, and whether or not you're implying you are linked to somebody else. But I suspect that AI creativity is going to have, without more legislative protection, is going to have some vast moral issues. There's also an issue with what is called, and I do have to look this up because I can never remember my acronyms, model autophagy disorder, where just very quickly at the end of this presentation, I'm going. What happens is this AI, this training, this large language model, is trained on data. Except the problem is that what it ends up doing is not only is it trained on the human data that's out there, which may or may not, of course, require a copyright license, which it doesn't have, but it also ends up consuming itself. It consumes its own content or content from other AI programs. And if that content is wrong, or if that content is inefficient or biased or any of these other things, immoral, what happens is the whole system starts to consume itself. And it starts generating worse and worse outputs with more and more bias and with less and less morality, because it is like an Ouroboros. And this could have a massive impact on humanity's knowledge and on the information that's out there on the internet, if these systems do end up consuming themselves without protecting themselves. So the question I think we have to end with, because I'm aware of time, is what are we incentivizing here? Whose creativity are we incentivizing? Is human creativity more important to society? I think one would argue yes at the moment, obviously, because these AI systems are not yet creative enough to attract their own, own their own IP, to be deemed to be themselves creative. But once we do get to the step where AI can generate its own work and its own programming, which is coming, I don't think anyone would believe that it isn't coming. How are we going to prioritize human creativity? Should we prioritize creativity by humans? Or is it just about the work? Is it just about these things are creative, creating art just as much as anybody else is? there was a piece in the English press recently about how poetry had been judged, human poetry versus AI poetry had been judged in a study. And actually, the humans that were taking part in the study preferred the AI poetry and indeed couldn't tell the difference either way. So do we need to prioritize human creativity? And do we need to promote it with copyright law, patent law, or any of these other ideas, passing off a form of licensing? Some suggestions have been that we use a sort of royalty system. There have been suggestions for using some sui generis systems like we have currently for database protection. So there are other ideas for how we protect it. So in that 20 minutes, I've been through, in effect, a summary of what AI creativity is, where we see it, things like on Spotify with Spotify Music, artistic works, literary works. And I've been through how copyright law protects it, how patent law protects it as a comparator, and whether or not I think this is going to work in the future. I'm not sure we're currently at the stage where this is a problem, but I think we are getting close to it, and we do need legislation to be forward-facing. So thank you for your time. I will open up the floor to questions.
Thank you, Ruth, for the interesting presentation. It's quite interesting to see how, because we are familiar with AI as it applies to education settings. So the way that it applies to creativity, I guess it's also quite interesting. I'd like to pose a question on terminology, actually, because like when we do have some other question, but like I would like to start off with a question in terminology, which you mentioned like often like the human versus non-human products. So this kind of creates a binary, because like I'm coming from a background of like human geography and social sciences, where we are actually using a term rather than non-human, more than human, which kind of, it switches the focus. It doesn't focus on the human or non-human kind of distinction. So like I would like to hear like whether like this binary in terms of terminology, actually it's, it kind of flattens. It's either you're human or you're not human, and like whatever you're created by a non-human, it's just classified as such.
I mean, that's a really fascinating way of looking at it. The answer is that with IP law, the legislation definitely does make it binary. It is human creator, human owner, human patent holder, and failure itself, which was the most recent case in patent law about whether or not an AI could be creative enough to own its own patent. The case law did very clearly talk about humans versus, as I say, it did mostly refer to it as AI, so it didn't use a descriptive verb, so to speak. It just kept saying it was Davis was the name of his because of course he'd named it, because of course he did. It was an acronym, but I do get the sense that he named it because he was trying to humanize it as well, which is kind of an interesting area of that case. But yeah, IP law definitely at the moment does really go you're either human or you're not. And the monkey selfie case was a very interesting one, because that was very obviously something that was alive. And actually, I think we would all understand that some of these creatures do have senses of art. And indeed, I refer to David Attenborough in my and of course, nature documentaries are fascinating things. And if we allow for these things to be, for animals to be creative because they're living beings, I genuinely think that is an interesting distinction, because they are still living things. They are still, as I say, subject to this opportunity cost, this fact that life costs effort. And if you use effort to be creative, you are not using it to feed yourself, for example. Whereas AI, as a program, doesn't actually come with that level of something. And it doesn't have that level of individuality either. So your perspective is a really interesting one, and I think I'd like to think about that further. The thing I will say about AI is the opportunity cost that doesn't go away. It's just a different cost. The other issue with AI is currently it takes an awful lot of energy. These programs, the servers that run them are horrendous for the environment. So there is an opportunity cost involved, just not related to the actual AI. It's related to us all as a planet hosting these things.
Okay. We have some questions. So the first one comes from Jeremiah Firi from Malawi, who is asking what is currently being done to ensure moral and ethical, I guess, uses and issues with AI. What is the current legislation? I would imagine is the question.
And that's a really fascinating question. Thank you. The answer is that we have some built-in protections against immoral creations in legislation, in things like so the point I raised about reanimating dead people. You have privacy rights. You have passing off, i.e., imagining these people to be, linked to things they aren't, so you can prevent. And of course, we have general laws on the creation and dispersal of like dangerous or immoral art and literature under things like the Online Safety Act and stuff in the UK now, where some of these things are just covered by online communications law, where you're not allowed to send harmful material around. The other thing is, of course, at the moment, a lot of these programs are themselves somewhat controlled in relation to morality, because of course it's standard law of the market. People don't want their program to be seen to be being used in a way that will harm their reputation on the market. So a lot of the time, if you try typing in, so for example, I don't know if the verb talk to ChatGPT is, but I chat with ChatGPT a lot about this sort of thing. And in earlier versions of ChatGPT, interestingly, it didn't say it was creative. It said that to be creative needed a lived experience, just by the by. But now when you chat with ChatGPT and you ask it to create something that it thinks is immoral, it won't do it. It comes up with an error message. So the answer is there are laws out there, just they're disparate and they're not quite as focused as we might like. And the programming themselves, the terms and conditions of these programs currently protects us against some of these things. Whether or not that works on block, I am willing to accept that there are arguments either way.
Okay. We have one more question, which Fred Lally is asking about the difference between, I guess it's large language models and natural language models, like LLM and NLM.
So I will say that sort of goes beyond the scope of copyright law and IP because currently there is no distinction. Like it's large language models, AI are seen as the same thing in intellectual property law. So that I think is a question where, to my understanding, it is about the programming and it is about how they're trained and about how the program itself is set up. Unfortunately, that is as far as my comp sci knowledge that goes, my computer science knowledge goes in this area, purely because, as I say, the law doesn't necessarily distinguish at the moment. It's a good point, and that is, I think, a downside of IP law, is that it legislates in areas it doesn't necessarily understand. It tries to impose normative social laws on comp sci, which I do think does require more of an input from computer scientists, which is interesting because patent law doesn't do the same thing. Patent law does actually pull from the scientists quite a lot. So this is an area, I think, where that is going to be the distinction. So that's a very good question. I'm sorry, I can't answer in any detail that.
It's okay. Thank you for the response. I need to, Dr. Cavadi, I don't know whether we have more time for more questions, or should we just...
I think we can conclude. I don't know if you want to pose one more question?
I mean, we have some other questions like there is like this discussion where like students are posing like that they think AI was meant to evolve by learning from humans. So whether there will be a time that they will be able to go beyond human behavior. It's a bit kind of this how can I call it? Don't want to call it the Terminator kind of dilemma, but it's I think that we are in a bit of this dilemma with all these films that have been created and all these stories that have been told about where this is going. So I think it's an important question to pose.
It is, definitely. And as I say, currently we aren't there yet. And the estimates they're saying are somewhere between now and 2035, the technology to get there. But they do think the technology. In terms of movies, I don't think there is a better movie about this than Bicentennial Man. That is a very old movie, the Robin Williams from, I think that's the early aughts. And for that but the topics in that about a robot that is artistic, that tries to get its own humanity and indeed succeeds in the end, spoiler alert, I think shows that these ideas aren't new ideas. These problems that we've been discussing for the last 20 years, and it's just the technology has now caught up. So I think it will eventually become creative enough to be creative without humanity. Whether or not I fear for that day is a different matter. I'm not going to be tin hat here about, how the robots are going to. We've all seen, as you say, the Terminator and everything else. That who's going to win in that battle? But yeah.
Okay. Should we, Dr. Cavadia, should we wrap it up? Because there are a lot of questions coming in relation to AI. What we can do is just collect them and forward them to Ruth. So we,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
So Ruth, thank you very much for the insightful presentation. I think it's quite interesting to see how AI is like a postmodern topic, let's say, is being kind of evolving in various disciplines, not just education, not just social sciences, in law, in various kind of disciplines. So thank you very much for the presentation. It was quite interesting and very insightful. So if I'm not mistaken, now we have the session on law. Is that correct?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Flaherty. Thank you, Dr. Paryskianis. We will now start session 3. The topic is law. We welcome Mr. Christos Konstantis, who will chair this session. Mr. Konstantis is Program Leader of the School of Education, Humanities and Social Sciences at Unicaf Federal. Mr. Konstantis, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cavadia. With my turn, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's session. In this particular field of the session, we're going to explore a range of thought-provoking topics at the intersection of law, governance, and emerging global challenges, from addressing critical issues like sexual violence during conflict and the balance between humanitarian and intervention and sovereignty, to the involving legal frameworks for space tourism and the pressing need for diversity in corporate leadership. Our presenters bring fresh perspectives and valuable insights. Each of these presentations highlights the importance of innovating thinking and robust legal analysis in shaping a more just and inclusive world. So, without any further delay, I'd like to welcome on the floor Mrs. Mrs. Eunice Saligiru. Mrs. Saligiru, are you here to be acknowledged? Thank you. So the floor is yours. Sir, would you like me to share my screen with you, or are you going to share your presentation?
If you have my presentation. I will be happy if you can share. If not, I will share. Oh, great.
So, our esteemed student, Mrs. Inuis, will present her insightful research on the effectiveness of international law in preventing and punishing sexual violence as a weapon of war. Having reviewed her presentation, her study critically examines international law's response to conflict related to sexual violence, addressing its gaps and limitations, while drawing on significant legal cases like the Nuremberg trials and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And I have to say, Inuit's work aims to ignite a vital discussion on redirecting global efforts toward justice and prevention. So, Inuit, the floor is yours. You may start.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christos. It's my pleasure to be part of this presentation today. And I can say it's quite a setup to come after Ruth because her presentation was quite superb. But thank you very much. So as introduced by Dr. Christos, I am Eunice Shilajiru. I am Miss from Liverpool John Moores University. I undertook a Master of Law and I am presenting from Nairobi, Kenya. I work within the financial services sector and I have a 10-year experience in banking. I will be handling an analysis of the international law's response with my topic as the effectiveness of international law in preventing and punishing sexual violence as a weapon of war. And to my introduction, looking at it, the underestimated impact of sexual violence during war. Sorry, Mr. Christos, can I share my screen? I think I will move much faster. My apologies for that.
I think our colleague, Mr. Dimitriou, is handling the presentation. So if you would like to move forward with the slides, just state next slide and our colleague will help you towards.
Thank you very much. Kindly go to the next slide and introduction.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but would it be also possible to put the presentation in slideshow mode? Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I have made my introduction, so I'm going on to the introduction of this topic, looking at the underestimated impact of sexual violence during war. This has really contributed to the lack of proper justice to the victims and less attention to by the international community in recognizing it as a weapon of mass destruction, with the same measure as other weapons like atomic bombs, guns, and so forth. So in this regard, the information that amounts to evidence presented usually during the sexual violence in war is limited and not well documented most of the time. And the data like whom, where, and when sexual violence is committed is usually most unclear, leading to the limitation of prosecuting sexual violence as a weapon of war. So the objective of this paper is to examine the effectiveness of international law in preventing and punishing sexual violence as a weapon of mass destruction. And I will have a key focus on the consequences of international law's delay in recognizing sexual violence as a weapon. And this paper also seeks to create a significant shift in the current thinking on war and gender and the recognition of sexual violence as a wartime, not just a simple byproduct of war, as often we have seen that this is usually planned and a strategic policy laid down on paper and on the table to be used as a weapon of war. This paper will aim at drawing attention to sexual violence as a weapon of war and creating a significant legal angle in dealing with prosecuting the perpetrators of sexual violence during war, drawing rules, guidelines to be followed by all nations in order to minimize and prevent the use of sexual violence during wartime. On my slide 3, thank you. My topic falls under conflict conflict warfare in international and humanitarian law. And the background of this study, if you move to the background of the study, I intend to define sexual violence and close look at the occurrence of sexual violence in wars from the ancient time to the present, dating back in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 1900s, up to the present. And with this in mind, I intend to unfold the outcome of the cases of the prosecutors, for example, Nkurunziza of 1998, which marked the official acceptance, actually, of the presence and the strategic sexual violence during war. That was done actually 65 years after the Holocaust. I will also travel back in time, highlighting the Nuremberg post-Holocaust trials in the cases that prosecuted the Nazi war criminals conducted between 1945 to 1946, and how this case failed to prosecute perpetrators of sexual violence during the period of war, and the consequences that it carried all the way 65 years later after that prosecution was done. If you could help me to just tick on slide 4 kindly. So I have two, just slide 4 is okay. I have two main objectives for this research, and the first one is to uncover the reason for the alarming trend of the use of sexual violence as a weapon of mass destruction during war, and why has it become the favorite of the combat during war to use sexual violence more than other weapons that are being used, and we have seen that trend grow. And the second objective is to create a significant shift in the current thinking that sexual violence is a byproduct of war, and actually evidencing that this is indeed often planned and should be treated as a separate and independent tool of war that is used for mass destruction. So for my research questions, I seek to respond to 5 questions. I seek to answer 7 questions. And the first one is, has the international law recognized sexual violence as a weapon of war? The motivation behind the use of violence as a weapon of war? Does the rules of the international law really effectively prevent sexual violence during war? Do we have legal structures in the international community to address the cases that have already occurred? Because healing, you realize that it's still in progress, and then have the perpetrators properly being punished, or do we still have perpetrators walking free outside? And what are the short and long-term consequences of sexual violence in the international community when it has been used as a tool of war? And I will lastly draw my recommendations to the international law to help address sexual violence as a weapon. If you move to slide 6, the scope of this paper will examine the literature relating to sexual violence in times of war, gaps identified in the international law based on prior literature, and draw recommendations to the international body, as I had mentioned earlier, that will aid in the future prevention of sexual violence, mainly used as a weapon of mass destruction, and also bring proper justice to victims who have already suffered and continue to suffer sexual violence during war. At the end of this study, this paper seeks to ignite concern and redirect energy and resources in the international law, and recommitment to the international community in dealing with and addressing, preventing conflict-related sexual violence, so that we may end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. If we could move to slide 7. So, according to the International United Nations report, actually, the pattern of sexual violence has since worsened. And based on the recent conflict-ridden areas such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Haiti, South Sudan, Ukraine, and most recently Israel, there has been documentation of sexual violence in the above mentioned, clearly noting that sexual violence has broadly played a part as a strong weapon and used as a form of torture and inhumane treatment against civilians and prisoners of war. So to get a dense outcome, the paper will focus on the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war, and will study demographically the Nuremberg, that is for the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda genocide, Democratic Republic of Congo, and looking at the World War, sexual violence by ISIS on Yazidi women, and the former Yugoslavia and Bosnia. So this is where my coverage of the study has been targeted. If we can move to slide 8. So this paper's literature review will entail the motivation behind the enemy's use of sexual violence for mass destruction, the reason behind the classification of sexual violence as a weapon of war, effects of sexual violence as a weapon of war to the international community, the role of international community in recognizing sexual violence as a weapon of war, the role played by the international community in effectively preventing sexual violence as a weapon of war through its rules and laws and the strategies that have been laid in place, and are there significant legal structures in place to address sexual violence as a weapon of war as and when it has occurred? Has the international law properly punished perpetrators of sexual violence during war is also one of the concerning things that I'll be covering in the literature review. Still on the literature review, during this progress, I will look at the milestones achieved by the international law in preventing and punishing sexual violence as a weapon of war, with a focus on the 1993 Vienna World Conference of Human Rights, the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, that is the ICC, that took place in 1998, and also the Resolution 1325 of the 2000 United Nations Council, Security Council, that took place in the year 2000. I intend to also look at the cases, the legal cases touching on sexual violence during war. And you realize that the first two that I have highlighted, from the Nuremberg to the Tokyo trials, I intend to bring out the fact that despite evidence of widespread sexual violence, these trials did not specifically prosecute rape and other forms of sexual violence as standalone crimes, but these were included as part of the other war crimes. But this was not able to solve the problem critically, noting that this had been strategically used both in the Nuremberg and Tokyo wars as a weapon of mass destruction. While, looking at the former Yugoslavia and Bosnia prosecutions, that is the focus on the Furodiza case that happened in 1998. While the cases were significant in explicit focus on sexual violence singularly, that is away from what Nuremberg and Tokyo trials had prosecuted, it did bring out and illustrated the challenges in obtaining reliable testimonies and difficulties that the victims would face during the testifying moments of the sexual violence that they had encountered. And these cases highlighted the need and the importance of support systems for witnesses and the victims to ensure proper protection and proper judicial process in ensuring that the perpetrators were brought to justice. And if you look at the next slide, after looking at those cases, the summary of the legal cases that I will be handling will be touching on sexual violence. We'll critically look at the late recognition of sexual violence as a crime of war, the command responsibility and accountability, limited focus on sexual violence as a war, and limited direct prosecution, and going up to the misrecognition of systematic sexual slavery and evolving definition of sexual violence, which we need to take in part, noting that sexual violence does not only include rape, but other forms of sexual violences as well.
If I can say, you have 2 minutes left for your presentation.
Sure. And next is my last slide, that I will also look at the limitations of the study. And this paper is based on prior literature that has been researched by other scholars. And so that means that it could have gotten biased information. We have population gap, and it's based on data that has already been pre-recorded and not data that I have obtained firsthand. So thank you very much. I'll move on to you, Dr. Christos, for questions.
Thank you, Eunice. A very insightful presentation as to issues that should be examined by the international law, especially those issues that fall under the International Criminal Court of Hague. Now, we should move forward with the Q&A session. We have 5 minutes left for questions, so the floor is open to participants. Before moving forwards with them, I'd like personally to address a question to you, if I can say. So I'd like to ask you, based on your presentation, considering the gaps identified in your presentation in international law, what would you think would be the immediate steps the international community can take to improve the prosecution of sexual violence as a war crime?
Thank you very much. That's a good question and close to my heart. So the first low-hanging fruits that I think we can capitalize on, Dr. Christos, is having policies trickle down into the countries, trickle down into the states, other than having one singular body dealing with these prosecutions. So if we can have these legislations adopted in our constitution and all our constitutions in different nations within the international community recognizing this as a strong weapon of war, then we will have the in-country prosecutions probably after a war has been occurred, seriously focusing on this as an item to prosecute and not looking at only the international community, because looking at it from my previous, from my literature that I have gone through and studied a bit of the pieces, you realize that when the international community is prosecuting, for example, the ICC, they do not get into the root of the people who did the perpetrators of the sexual violence themselves, but they prosecute the commanders, the army commanders, the people that were in the position who actually did not carry out these atrocities in this place. So having these legislations trickle down into countries will solve our immediate problem of having this ignored for a very long time, and also bringing justice to the victims.
So we are moving forward with Audrey Kalehi Bridget. I do apologize if I'm pronouncing the name wrongly. Is Audrey here with us?
Yes, that is correct. And I'm kindly requesting to project my presentation. Let me unmute my video. Thank you.
I think your presentation will be shared from our end, like with the previous presenters as well.
Okay.
So Bridget will present her research title, How diverse are corporate boards? Audrey's work critically examines the progress and challenges surrounding boards diversity, highlighting its importance in corporate governance, financial performance, and innovation. Based on her presentation, I have to say she explores key diversity dimensions such as gender, race, age, socioeconomic background, and provides recommendation for enhancing inclusivity within corporate leadership structures. With a strong focus on qualitative, comparative, and empirical research, Audrey tries to shed a light on the global trends and the policy implication in this crucial area. So let us warmly welcome her to the floor and share her insights on this very interesting topic. The floor is yours, Audrey.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this platform. And thank you to all those who've made their time to come and listen to this presentation. I appreciate it. My discussion today will be about diversity on corporate boards. The diversity of corporate boards has been increasing in recent years, yet there's still room for improvement. For example, women are more ambitious than ever, and work flexibility is fueling them. Yet, despite their hard-fought gains, women are not represented fully and are not keeping up pace. The representation of racial and ethnic minorities on corporate boards is still relatively low. in addition to gender and racial and ethnic diversity, my paper suggests that corporate boards perform better when they include the best people who come from a range of perspectives and backgrounds, such as age, sexual orientation, disability status, socioeconomic background, educational background, and professional experience. Globally, trends are showing that some countries such as Norway and France, there are quotas set for gender diversity. And in other countries like the United Kingdom and United States of America, there are no quotas for women on boards, as well as other representations. It is the history and roots of the lack of diversity on corporate boards that this research attempts to analyze and document. Next slide. According to reports from Women in the Workplace published by McKinsey and a Lean-In organization in 2023, flexible working arrangements are encouraging women to pursue their goals more than ever. However, representation of women is falling short at every level. Racial and ethnic minorities are still at the lowest groups represented on corporate boards. For example, Black directors are only 12.3% in the Fortune 500 companies, and Hispanic directors represent a meager 7.7% on board seats. So the study will attempt to outline the steps needed to improve board diversity and discuss the benefits of having a diverse corporate board. Next slide. Linked to the gaps I faced in my literature review linked to law, I discovered that the boardroom is where risk is managed, governance is implemented, and strategic decisions are made, yet corporate boards are not as diverse as they could be. However, information on other types of diversity is lacking in the available literature, as it's also essential that boards get the best of professionals with a range of backgrounds, experience, and skills by merit. As referenced before, there are quotas for women set in countries like United States and United Kingdom, and investors and stakeholders have been exerting pressure on the increased basis of companies to have more diversity on boards. Next slide, please. So the paper focused on 4 types of researches. The first one was qualitative research method, which is an interpretative and a naturalistic approach to its subject matter and is concerned with philosophical orientations to interpret research. So linked to this, companies must work toward their board diversities in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, age, socioeconomic background, and professional experience. Next slide. Comparative research is a method to understand the similarities and differences of 2 or more things. So the paper focuses on research seeking to understand the aspects of differences noted in corporate governance. For instance, the provisions of role models, education, training, flexible working arrangements, organizational culture, and unconscious bias. Next slide, please. Empirical legal research is premised on experimentation through data collection and subsequent analysis of that data collected. So it forms a bridge between reality, what exists, the accurate knowledge of what exists, and reality as we perceive it, referenced here as empirical knowledge. So boards in this case should be constituted by high caliber people who together make a mix of skills, experiences, and backgrounds based on merit. Next slide, please. Social legal research focuses on law and its relationship to society. So my paper will utilize a historical analysis in its approach to examine the practical implementation of law in corporate boardrooms. It will put an emphasis on the social context of the legal system with intent to put social inequities right and power relationships in corporate administration. For instance, the issues of no flexibility about work and life balance, a perceived traditional male cultural environment, and the lack of opportunities for women to network. Next slide, please. This paper further examines the legal framework of corporate governance in Kenya and the ways that the laws in Kenya seek to address the issue. So Kenya's corporate governance structure has advanced significantly, yet there's much room for development. The Companies Act is a primary piece of legislation controlling the field of company governance in Kenya. It provides some foundation, yes, but its scope is still limited regarding issues relating to private companies. The next legal provision in Kenya is the Capital Markets Authority Guidelines, which sets out good governance practices, for example, board composition, audit committees, risk management, and disclosure requirements. The third legal provision in Kenya for corporate boards is the Nairobi Security Exchange Listing Rules. Nairobi here referenced as the capital city of the country. In these rules, it includes requirements on corporate governance applicable to companies listed on the stock exchange. Next slide, please. The legal framework focuses on director duties, requiring them to act in the best interest of the company, shareholder rights, and the extent they can sue the company and protected to a certain degree, audit and financial reporting, disclosure requirements, which are strict for public companies to guarantee transparency and accountability. Next slide, please. Despite the efforts the Kenyan government has set up on corporate governance, it still faces several challenges. For example, there's limited coverage of private companies, and the law offers very scanty guidance on how to conduct corporate governance. There's weak enforcement on issues like compliance. There's a lack of independent boards, with most companies still family-owned, family-run, and closed business dominated boards, which means there's definitely a lack of independence. And finally, there's an inadequate investor protection where shareholder rights are not as robust as they could be, limiting investor protection. Next slide, please. To address the challenges I've just mentioned, various stakeholders are working to improve the corporate governance landscape through Code of Corporate Governance, which would recommend the voluntary guidelines to be followed by the companies, capacity building through training and education, investor education, where you raise that awareness on corporate governance to help the investors with positive change, and regulatory reforms, where the government is considering revising the Companies Act I referenced to make its provisions related to corporate governance more strict. I'd say Kenya's corporate governance has advanced much already, but there's still room for opportunity to grow through the resolution of diverse issues and measures to make the corporate law in Kenya more efficient. Kenya has a potential to bolster investor assurance and foster sustainability of commercial activities, as well as augment macroeconomic expansion. Next slide, please. You may be thinking, what are the benefits of board diversity? I'd say there's improved decision-making, there's stronger governance, corporate governance, better financial performance, enhanced creativity and innovation. For example, boards that have helped companies to identify and capitalize on new opportunities are Nike, that produces sports equipment. Women on the Nike board are 45%, and individuals of color are also 45%. And because of that diversity, Nike has been able to create products that appeal to a larger spectrum of consumers and better understand the needs of diverse customer base. For example, Nike has introduced a collection of hijabs specifically designed for Muslim athletes. Another example is General Electric, where 38% of the board are female, 31% are diverse in terms of racial and ethnicity, and General Electric has been able to recognize and seize fresh opportunities based on that diversity. And because of that, General Electric managed to expand further from the United States to China and India, which are now its top two economies in terms of expansion. Finally, Apple, which is famous for phones and the tablets we use, has 20% of women and 40% of people of color. And because of that, Apple has been able to stay ahead of the curve in terms of innovation. Apple, for instance, was among the first businesses to create smartphones with a touchscreen interface based on feedback of that diversity. Next slide, please. Other benefits of board diversity are increased employee engagement, enhanced innovation, and improved brand reputation. Just to give a few examples of how this is possible, a company that has a diverse board of directors is more likely to be perceived as inclusive and sensitive to requirements of its stakeholders and customers. A company that has a diverse board is more likely to be regarded as creative and progressive. Increased brand awareness and a more favorable brand image is more likely to be the outcome of this. A company with a diverse board is more likely to be seen as a good corporate citizen if its board is diverse. Better ties are more possible when it's linked to community, it's linked to regulators, and linked to investors. Next slide, please. So based on the benefits of increased board diversity, I'd say that organizations are able to foster innovation and improve their decision-making that is representative of communities. Several steps are needed to make this possible, and suggestions are setting quotas where you measure employees' outcomes and experiences, targeting of diverse candidates in companies, providing unconscious bias training, and making it clear that issues like microaggression is not possible, creating a culture of inclusion where members feel valued and respected. Next slide, please. In conclusion, in my view, organizations could look at the diversity policies in place to tweak out changes that are required for board diversities. Companies need to work on tracking outcomes for representation through gender, through age, through disability, through sexual orientation, through professional experience. Because increasing the diversity of corporate boards will improve financial performance, enhance innovation, and boost improved reputation. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think, Audrey, that your presentation, if I can say, has offered a nuanced perspective on the multi-dimensional challenges of corporate board diversity. By linking theoretical frameworks with empirical evidence, you have effectively highlighted the systemic barriers that persist and proposed targeted interventions to overcome them. Also, your focus on the intersection of the regulatory frameworks and organizational culture provides a valuable roadmap for addressing diversity deficits. The practical recommendations that you mentioned, such as the capacity of building and investor education, further emphasized the importance of collaborative approaches in fostering inclusive governance structure. This work not only informs future policy directions, but also equips practitioners with possible and actionable strategies to promote equitable representation and leadership. So for that, your presentation was very excellent. So before giving the floor to the attendees for the Q&A session, let me ask you the first question. And that would be, what role, based on your research, do you think investors and other external stakeholders play in influencing board diversity, and how can their engagement be structured to achieve sustained change?
Thank you. I would suggest the role of investors and stakeholders in achieving board diversity is asking the hard questions during, for example, meetings on what are the returns on their assets? What are the returns on earnings per share? How is inclusivity ensured in a company's policy? What in the mission and vision statement of the company? What are the prospects of revenue growth? What are the return on equity? How do we ensure that our voices are brought to the table? It's a bottom-up approach and not top-down from the management. How do we ensure inclusivity, not only of one homogeneous group, but everyone in society, and that the thoughts and ideas are interpreted and feedback is given back either verbally or in writing or both ways? That would be my response.
Thank you. So, a question from an attendee. What safeguards can be put in place to ensure that diversity initiatives do not undermine the perception of competency? Did your thesis explore any unintended consequences of diversity policies, such as tokenism?
Such as?
Tokenism.
Yes, my thesis explored issues such as unconscious bias. When, for example, you are appointed on a board, the first thing people look at beyond your gender and the obvious things are, what is your social background, your age, your ethnicity, microaggressions, issues like it's a compliment, but it's not such a nice compliment. For example, how did you learn such good English coming from where you come from? So such issues need to be addressed when engaging diversity on boards, and training is also needed to come out of that mindset and be more inclusive.
Okay, thank you so much. So, another question. Does political climate affect corporate governance of institutions? And if so, how can one mitigate such influence in the management of these institutions?
Political climate definitely affects institutions and board diversity. How to overcome this is, one, lay out from the beginning, what are the rules and regulations of this board that you're coming into? And keep reminding the members what they have signed up to and what is acceptable and not acceptable. Secondly, even when people try and distract you from your goal, just stick to the mission. What is ruling us as the leadership of this board? What are the tenets that we should live by? What will our shareholders look at when we go back to them with the feedback we have received? You can't just focus on the politics, and be also aware of the dynamics of different angles people bring to the table, and try to be a bit polite, have a polite working environment. Yes, you may disagree on issues, but keep coming back to the goals and vision of the board and move towards that path.
Thank you. Another question. How can corporate boards strengthen their relationships with stakeholders beyond stakeholders such as employees, customers, and communities?
Okay, thank you. Strengthening of relationships beyond stakeholders and communities is through having an outward interface. It's not just about profits and paying the board members allowances to make them happy. You have to meet the people you work with. You have to go to the ground and ask, what are your needs and how can we meet those needs as best as possible? Don't be aloof to the environment around you. People talk of corporate social responsibility, but what are you as a board doing to meet the needs of these people? Listen to their voices and try as much as possible to be as simple in implementation of what they want. Forget the policies, forget the paperwork. Go down to the basics and listen to the voices of the people on the ground. Accountability to the people you serve.
Okay. Another question. Which strategy can be applied to influence boards to address diversity?
Which strategy? I'd look at the social legal framework where you interpret the law based on society because you're living in a community with people. So that would be my suggestion, the social legal framework, where you use your law, what you've studied, and the policies of the board, and link it to the society you serve.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we are going to conclude due to time constraint this presentation, this session. Thank you for your presentation as well. So in today's conclusion, today's presentations have offered insightful analysis into pressing global issues from corporate governance to legal frameworks, addressing from humanitarian crisis and emerging industries. Each presenter has brought forward thought-provoking perspectives grounded in rigorous research, highlighted both the challenges and opportunities in their respective fields. I think that these discussions serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of the interdisciplinary approaches in addressing complex problems. Thank you all for these presentations. Now I yield the floor back to Dr. Cavadia. Thank you all for your presentations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Konstantis, for chairing this session. Thank you all for your participation. We will stop now for a small break. We will be back in 20 minutes. Please join us again for more presentations from the School of Education, Humanities and Social Sciences. Thank you. Welcome back. We will start with session 4. Mr. Christos Damianou will chair this session. Mr. Damianou is academic coordinator and program leader of the School of Education, Humanities and Social Sciences. Mr. Damianou, the floor is yours.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome back from the break. Thank you, Anna. Now we move on to the criminology department. I am Christos Damianou. I'm an academic coordinator for the School of Humanities, Social Sciences and Education, and also program leader for the Criminology and Social Policy program. So the first presentation we're gonna see today is by Ivan Nichols. The title is The Decriminalization of Cannabis in Trinidad and Tobago. It's an analysis of the impact on the criminal justice system. And then the second presentation will be by Sharon Mozetti Onchwari, which is about the utilization of the diversion program in reducing institutionalization among juvenile offenders in Kenya. So shall we begin?
Mr. Ivan Nichols, can you hear us? Would you please unmute yourself? Okay. Do you hear us?
Yes, I'm hearing.
Okay, okay. Yes, you may start your presentation.
Okay, hi. Good morning or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols are observed. My name is Ivan Nichols, and I'm from the Twin Island of Trinidad and Tobago, which is a small island in close proximity to the South American landmass. In 2022, I was a recipient of a scholarship from the Unicaf University, and I subsequently enrolled at the Liverpool John Moore University, where I pursued my master's in criminology and social justice. Today, I'm given the opportunity to present an overview of my master's thesis topic, which entails the decriminalization of cannabis in Trinidad and Tobago, and analysis of the impact on the criminal justice system. Next slide. All right, this is our national flag. Next slide. And this is the topic that I spoke about. All right, this is my presentation overview, so that it was important before we begin each specific subtitle, because I was a foreign student, the research paper had some constraints in terms of the methodology that was available to me to answer the research question. As a consequence of that, I used the secondary data in my literature review. And of course, I employed the systematic literature review, which involves systematically searching, selecting, and synthesizing previous research studies on a particular topic or sections. So could you move on to the other slide, please? All right, so as a consequence of the methodology that I used, it required me to formulate research questions, and those are the research questions that was formulated. What are the implications of criminalizing cannabis on the criminal justice system? What deterrence and sociological theories can explain the failures of cannabis prohibition? And what are the possible implications of decriminalizing cannabis in Trinidad and Tobago? Next slide, please. So as a consequence of that, research objectives were formulated from those research questions. Next slide, please. This is an explanation of the research methodology. Of course, because of the systematic literature review methodology I used, I had to clearly define the research methodology and of course how I intend to solicit those the data for the research. And this is an explanation of some of the various data, statistical analysis, literature reviews, case studies, and of course the methodology of analyzing those by content analysis and statistical analysis. Next slide, please. Right, so I had also to explain the inclusion and exclusion methods that was used in order to select those research material. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, having done that, in terms of clearly defining the inclusion and exclusion methods, I developed subheadings, and some of those subheadings that would have give me the answer to the various research that would answer the research questions were the historical evaluation of cannabis prohibition, the chemical analysis of cannabis and its effect on the users, the economic and social consequence of cannabis prohibition, and of course the deterrence and sociological theories that seek to explain cannabis prohibition. Yeah, next slide, please. So the historical criminalization of cannabis, based on the research, what I found out was that cannabis has always been, from time immemorial, especially for those primordial societies, it was used for religious and medical purposes. In Trinidad and Tobago, how the drug was introduced to my country or to my region was after the emancipation of the slaves. The East Indian indentured laborers was introduced to the region. And of course, they had their religious customs. Most of them were Hindus and Muslims. And as a consequence of that, the cannabis was introduced to the region. Of course, the name that they used was ganja, weed, grass. And of course, that was because of our colonial legacy. Additionally, how cannabis became criminalized. What I found out in my research was that there was a single convention on narcotics. That's a 1970 conference, and it happened in The Hague. And of course, in that conference, what went on was that cannabis was criminalized and classified as a Schedule 1 and Schedule 4 drugs capable of having a high potential of abuse and limited medical and therapeutic use. All the participating countries agree to that, and that is the starting point in terms of the criminalization of cannabis from an international perspective. Next slide, please. Right, in Trinidad and Tobago, since we were a colonial subject at the time, cannabis was criminalized, and of course, the act, the Dangerous Drug Act, criminalized cannabis in my country, and of course, it criminalized the possession, use, cultivation, and trafficking of cannabis, and there was significant penalties attached to it. So as a consequence, cannabis began a history of prohibition, visualization of this particular drug, which disproportionately incarcerated mainly minorities and had some severe economic and social repercussions. Next slide. In terms of the overall findings, what I found that cannabis was most frequently used drugs and accounts for the major drug risks and increased cost in the respective criminal justice systems. As a consequence of the economic and social consequences of prohibition, were analyzed, and according to Hammond 2011, most frequently infringement of persons' constitutional rights occurred by the law enforcement agencies. Hawkins 2012 substantiated the fact that there was a tremendous economic cost of prohibition or criminalization, both to the arrestees and the respective criminal justice systems. Next slide. In the US, research found that sociological factors have resulted from massive incarcerations, including the murder, and of course, it may have had destabilizing factors in countries. Right. Comparative analysis of cannabis prohibition in different countries. I looked at the USA, and of course, right.
You've got 2 minutes left. Just letting you know. You've got 2 minutes left. That's just reminding you. Okay.
Yeah, Reuters 2012, in a 20-year study, their results show that there was a threefold increase in the amount of arrests in the US. In terms of Trinidad and Tobago had a similar arrest perspectives. And of course, there were exponential increase in amounts of arrests. And of course, the cost of prohibition or criminalization to the criminal justice system in Trinidad and Tobago. Right, from a theoretical perspective, Altman 2021 found that cannabis prohibition generally failed to deter that particular crime And what he said was that it was too punitive and not reformative or retributive. Conversely, Chaffin and McCurry, 2017, also claimed that those kinds of informal sanctions cost are higher and are more likely to be of a deterrent rather than a punitive sanctions. Next slide, please. According to Miller and Miller, cultural transmissions and subcultural theories view drug use as a learned behavior, so that in those social environments, using drugs is not viewed as deviant or delinquent, but instead is looked at as a valued
Ivan, sorry to interrupt.
activity.
We're running out of time, so could you just finish what you're saying?
Yeah.
We'll move on
Next
to
slide,
the
please.
questions. Yeah.
So that the research has demonstrated that cannabis has failed to act as a deterrent and that the recreation and medical use of the drug has grown profoundly. The research is of significant because there has been limited research on the subject in the Caribbean and in my country. And of course, this may be due to a lack of the economic difficulties and foresight into the importance of the research for their development. The research was limited and was not able to explore these further research proposals. Of course, I never looked at the impact of the illegal Venezuelan immigration on the Trinidad and Tobago culture and economy. I never looked at the evaluation of the post-2019 discrimination of cannabis period and its impact on the criminal justice system in Trinidad and Tobago. And these and other further investigations that can be conducted, of course, an evaluation of the illicit cannabis industry and its contribution to the economic development of Trinidad and Tobago. The pros and cons of legalization. That's a continuation of some of the proposed further research. The pros and cons of the legalization of cannabis and the development of business opportunities for the various social strata in Trinidad and Tobago. And what is the significance of regional collaborative approach to decriminalization, legalization, and medicinal cannabis is an important future research that was unable to develop in this dissertation. Cannabis is a major economic factor in those Caribbean countries that have been devastated by the failure of the plantation.
Unfortunately, we have well exceeded the time limit for the slot for this presentation. If you don't mind, we will move on to the questions, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, first question. Obviously, we've talked about the decriminalization of well, cannabis. My question is, what is the difference between the legalization and decriminalization of cannabis?
I'm having difficulty in the volume.
Is that better? Is that better now?
Okay.
You can hear me clearly now?
Yeah, I'm hearing you a little better, yeah.
Right, okay. So my question is, what is the difference between legalization and decriminalization of cannabis?
The decriminalization of the cannabis in my country just legalize the possession and in certain circumstances for your own personal use. So it did not legalize cannabis possession and cultivation and that kind of stuff. Only in certain instances, especially for your own use, that you can use cannabis and that kind of thing for your own personal use. But in terms of legalization, in terms of the act that makes it illegal, the act still is valid, but there's only certain aspects of it that has been decriminalized.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question is, obviously, we've talked about the criminal justice system and what basically the effects of the decriminalization of cannabis. What would be the relationship between the criminal justice system and the welfare system in this, let's say, development?
And then hear the last part of the question.
Okay, I'm talking about the relationship between the criminal justice system and the welfare system. Okay, so let's say that such an act goes forward. What would be the relationship between the two?
The relationship between the criminal justice system and the welfare system, in terms of what?
In terms of the decriminalization of cannabis?
Okay. Okay. In terms of the decriminalization, what has happened was with the criminalization of cannabis, what led was massive incarcerations, and as such, it affected disproportionately persons at the lower end of the social economic strata. So as a consequence, the decriminalization in fact led to a decrease in the amount of arrests, and of course those social implications in terms of the stigma attached to an arrest, and of course all the necessary ramifications and impact on that on persons on in the lower social economic strata of the society, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, and that can be correlated to other economies as well. So that in terms of that welfare impact, the persons obviously would not be brought into the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system, in terms of the cost in terms of incarcerating individuals would be reduced, and as such, those kinds of benefits can be transferred into more social intervention strategies for the public at large, and specifically for those high-risk individuals.
Thank you for that, Ivan. Thank you very much for your presentation. We should move on to the next presentation, if that's okay. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Sharon? Sharon Ontwari, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Hello, can you hear us?
Hello, yes, I can hear you.
Sharon, do you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Can you also turn on your camera? Is that possible? All right, thank you.
Yes.
All right, let's share your presentation.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Sharon Museti from Kenya. I have undertaken my Master of Arts in Liverpool John Moores University in Criminology and Social Policy. I'll be presenting my dissertation paper by highlighting the role of diversion in the criminal justice system in reducing imprisonment among juvenile offenders in Kenya. So, kindly go to the next slide. Hello?
Sharon, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right.
Should I start again or should I continue from where?
No, let's start again because we didn't hear you.
Okay. As I said in my introduction, I am Sharon Museti, a Master of Arts student in Criminology and Social Policy from Liverpool John Moores University, and I'm in Kenya. So the presentation paper that I will be doing today was based on my dissertation, which highlighted the purpose and the role of diversion as a means of case disposition in Kenya's criminal justice system with regards to child offenders. So as a working definition, diversion is referred to as a means of handling juvenile delinquency matters without resorting to full judicial proceedings. The next slide, kindly. So in the dissertation paper, because the diversion is an uncustodial means of case disposition, I highlighted various reasons for embracing diversion, which when replicated throughout the system, it will actually reduce the institutionalization rates among offenders in general. So the first point that I'd like to point out is that Kenya has a fairly high imprisonment rate, and the data I obtained it from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which is the government body instituted to collect, distribute, and disseminate data from various state institutions. So they provided me with a lot of data, and it is actually open source, which can be looked up in the internet very easily. So the first point is that Kenya has a fairly high imprisonment rate. When you go through the averages from 2016 to 2022, you find that on average, 382 Kenyans per 100,000 have actually been incarcerated. This is a fairly high number because in countries such as USA, it is 350 per 100,000. So it goes to show you that diversion is actually a good means of reducing the high imprisonment rate. The next slide. Yes, so this will actually talk about the high prisoner population. Over the 7-year period, about 1.2 million people have been instituted in Kenyan prisons, and 90% are men. So, as I will state in the other slides, this majority of these people, majority of offenders are actually from poor socioeconomic backgrounds. So with regards to connecting criminology or finding the nexus between criminology and social policy, we find that majority of prisoners are actually in this category who come from poor social economic backgrounds. The third point, thank you very much. Kenya has a fairly high bloated prisoner population. From the data, you can actually see that the total institutional capacity of prisons, all the prisons in Kenya, is about 26,678 prisoners. Now, on the daily average prisoner population, this is on a daily basis, you find that it is 47,549 inmates. This basically means that at any single day for the 7-year period, the prisoner population was overpopulated by 178%. So this is a very key issue when we want to talk about decongesting prisons. We have to look at it from the decongestion side of it. So diversion is a key means of reducing or actually tackling Kenya's bloated prisoner population. The next slide. Yes, because of all of these issues which I've highlighted, it has resulted that in Kenya having a very high influx of case backlogs in Kenya. We can actually talk about the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions being understaffed, all of those issues, the high number of criminal cases, and this has actually resulted in a very high backlog of cases. So for that period from 2016 to 2022, we find that the total prisoner population for the unconvicted prisoners. Unconvicted prisoners basically mean a person who is in remand or who is committed to serve in a civil jail. So a remandee means that his or her case has not been completed, criminal case has not been completed. So with all of these issues, it means that there is a large number of backlog of cases which can, and diversion can actually help to reduce these instances. The next slide. Yes, so according to research, 75% of the latest census data, 75% of Kenyans are actually between ages 0 to 35 years old. So this has actually translated in the offending rates. You find that people from the age below 16 to 24 to 25 years old, are actually 18% of the prisoner population. So it goes to show you that most of the offenses a large number of the offenses for people in this category are actually youthful. The next slide. Yes, another issue to deal with, one of the importance of diversion is that a large number of which it is 33%, that is actually a third of the prisoners who are in the various penal institutions are actually serving sentences 2-year and below sentences. So from that category, you can see inmates who are serving less than 1 month sentences to 2 years or less. So from that data, we can actually see that 33% of inmates are in this category. Now, this is a very big capacity. This is a very big number because it shows that 421,000 individuals are in institutions and they are serving 2-year or below sentences. Now, when you go through various legislation in Kenya, for instance, the Probation of Offenders Act, it highlights that for one to be eligible to be considered for probation, their sentence needs to be between a 3-year and below sentence. So we can actually see that majority of these people are not supposed to be in these institutions if actually the law was to be considered in these conditions. The next slide. Yes, now, for in this instance, we can see that over the 7-year period, of the 1.2 million persons who were committed to prison, about 250,000 and 250,060 persons were actually served non-custodial sentences. So it means they were in various categories like community service, probation, and what is known as aftercare. So in this instance, we find that 20% of the entire prisoner population was actually eligible for probation, or the probation, and to go through the probation and aftercare service. So we find that for every one prisoner who was actually in the system, let us say who was in the system, 5 ended up serving a custodial sentence. So we find that this is supposed to be the reverse, because diversion now will offer a means of case disposition to be handled from the non-custodial point of view. The next slide, kindly. Yes, so in this category, we will see the difference in offending rates, and specifically children in conflict with the law, or children at odds with the law, as the paper terms it. So over the period of years, now what you can see from the data, it begins from 2018 to 2022. This is because the national prosecution policy, which governs, or which instituted the diversion policy, did not start until 2015. Now they did not have that data, and they started collecting the data from 2018. That is why you will actually see children in conflict with the law on this slide, and the other slide you will actually, that's why you see the disparity in the data. Yes. So when you go through that, when you consider both data sets, you will find that over the 5-year financial period, 79% of juvenile offenders have actually been diverted. Now, when you go through the data of adult offenders, you don't find this data. That is why I specifically mirrored down to juvenile offenders, because the data now with regards to adult offenders is not available. The next slide. So I will briefly highlight the theoretical framework behind diversion. And diversion is basically based upon the tenets of Lamarck, who established the labeling theory, and which is also known as the social reactions theory. So it places emphasis on the society's reaction to the crime, and not on the crime in itself. So when we are talking about social policy, we want to show the nexus between social policy and crime through what is known as the criminalization of social policy. So we want to look at whether society is the one which is actually propagating offenses through creating wrong social labels, which are applied on ex-offenders or actually offenders. So it is concerned primarily with the effect of the label on an individual's self-concept, image, and behavior. So according to labelists, they actually say that an individual becomes their label. So this is especially key for youthful offenders, because of their malleable nature, of their youthfulness. If they get a wrong label, which is labeled by the society, it actually propagates them to committing more offenses. That is the premise behind the diversion practice. Next slide, kindly. So labeling, as I stated earlier, it is not concerned with the crime in itself, but it is concerned with the attitudes and assumptions, especially after primary deviance has been detected by the society. So with regards to labeling, punishment through the criminal justice system is seen as an open act, which is very visible, unlike other means of punishment, which is through, let's say, the non-custodial sentences. So when a person is instituted for an offense, they seem to appear more hostile, more dangerous, and they may, even after serving their sentences, they may they may warrant more seclusion from the society when compared to individuals who have been through an uncustodial sentence. So that is the premise behind the labeling. So another thing which is important to talk about is the role of society in actually propagating the stigma and the ostracization which comes from a custodial sentence. So we find that individuals who have been through the criminal justice system and have been instituted will suffer more ostracization and more stigma as compared to individuals who have not been through the institution process. Next slide. So because a label is used for identification purposes, a label is used to tag as a tag the social stigma that a person goes through after being in an institution weighs heavily on them. And then the premise is that these individuals will look for other individuals who share the same values, who share the same inclinations and proclivities to commit, because that group is the one which actually accepts their behavior. They will end up committing the same acts, the same offenses, because it is permissible to that group. So that is why the cycle of delinquency continues even after an institutional sentence. So according to the label, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. You have about 2 minutes, okay?
Oh, okay, kindly let's go to the next slide about the benefits. Yes, so the benefits of diversion, it steers away the individual away from the negative and criminalization effects of the criminal justice system. This is, of course, as I stated earlier, by reducing the impact of the criminal justice system institutionalization process. Yes, next slide, kindly. Yes, it is a quicker means of resolving criminal matters. As I stated earlier, 63% of Kenyan prisoners are actually unconvicted, and the daily upkeep for one prisoner in Kenya is about 270 Kenya shillings. Now, what the biggest issue is that this is a stark contrast to a person who is in high school, because they receive less money than that, about 14,000 Kenya shillings. So it is more expensive to put a prisoner in prison than through other non-custodial means such as diversion. Next slide. Yes, it is based on the premise of restorative justice, which gives the offender and the community an opportunity to mend the fences and to restore the issues they had when the criminal offense happened. Next slide. Yes, it reduces the influx of prisoners to carceral institutions by diverting them away from incarceration. So the offender is diverted towards community-based programs which will reduce the rate of reoffending. Next slide. Yes, prisons are expensive to run, prisons are expensive to maintain. So the diversion generally reduces the overall operating cost of running these institutions. So the monies can be saved and be diverted towards other social policy programs which can be beneficial to society, because crime is a social problem and we need social policy to aid to reduce the effects of crime. Next slide, kindly. Oh yes, those are the references. Yes.
Thank you, Sharon, for your presentation. If you're okay with that, we shall proceed with the question.
Okay.
Okay, so a first question from the Q&A. What are the forms of diversion, as this may be missing from your paper?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. The forms of diversion, currently in Kenya, diversion practice is disjointed, as I highlighted maybe in my dissertation paper, because there are various government agencies which carry on the practice. We have the Department of Children's Services, we have the Probation and Aftercare Services, we have the Kenya Prison Service. So all of them can divert, and which is a very big issue because I believe that it's supposed to be run from one government institution to ease on this disjointed. Some children actually slip through the cracks. They are handled by 3 different institutions for the same offense. So if we can collect all of this to have one structure, to have one organization which handles all of the child delinquency matters, I believe that diversion will be easily, because in this case, the probation and aftercare service is trained differently on diversion than the Kenya Prison Service and the Department of Children's Services. So one has the risk needs responsibility, the other one has the motivational interviewing aspect, the other one has the cognitive behavior therapy. So it is not practiced equally. So I can say that this disjointing is what has brought about to be different forms of diversion.
The same, another question is, have they done or have you looked at the before and after effects of this act?
Thank you very much. One of the issues which I highlighted on the paper was that it needs to have a longitudinal study. Now, we should actually look at the individuals who have been through the system, the diversion process, after a several period of time, because we can only say that we are actually diverting them from the institutions, but we don't know whether that has the same effect of reducing criminal behavior. So that is an issue of concern, which I actually highlighted also in the paper.
Okay, last one. This is my question. Basically, what types of crime is it going with? Well, to be entitled, let's say, to the diversion program. Is it according to the crime that's committed or the age? Doesn't matter the crime.
Oh yes. So diversion specifically covers the age, and it doesn't matter the crime. For instance, crime like defilement, stealing, they actually they mix the entire crimes. So a children officer or a probation officer is supposed to conduct an assessment to see whether this, and of course, we in partnership with the Office of the Directorate of Public Prosecutions, they conduct an assessment to see the best source of rehabilitation. So it doesn't depend on the offense. But age is a key factor, because diversion right now is currently strictly only for minors. That's why there's no data for adult offenders.
Great. Thank you for your time, Sharon. Great presentation. Let's move on.
Thank you very much.
Hello again. We concluded session 4, and we will move forward to session 5. Session 5 will be chaired by Mrs. Kolyandri Ioanna, Dr. Kolyandri. Dr. Kolyandri, are you here? Okay. Dr. Kolyandri is program leader of the School of Education, Humanities and Social Sciences at Unicaf Federal. Dr. Kolyandri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Cavadia, for the introduction. I am happy to be chairing this session for psychology and mass communication. For this session, 2 very interesting presentations will follow. The first presentation will be in regards to mass communication, specifically in the television coverage of psychotherapey. And the second presentation will focus on education, specifically in the psychosocial well-being of teachers. Before we begin, I would like to inform the presenters that the presentation should last no longer than 15 minutes. I will interrupt you to remind you of the time when there are 2 minutes left. And once the presentations are over, we will continue with the Q&A from the audience. So to get us started for this session, the first presenter is Prescott Alexander with a presentation titled local mainstream television coverage of Cyclone Freddy in Malawi, a comparison between state media, NBC, and main private media news outlet, Zodiac TV and Times TV. The floor is yours, Pastor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. As he introduced, I'm Prescott Alexander Chipezayani from Malawi, and I was undertaking a Masters of Arts program with the Liverpool John Moores University. So I will be presenting to you the work that I undertook for my master's thesis titled Local Mainstream Television Coverage of Cyclone Freddy, which will compare the state media, Malawi Broadcasting Corporation, and the two main private television outlets, Zodiac and Times. Next slide, please. For the introduction, the study is examining the coverage of Cyclone Freddy by the public media as well as two key private media stations, and it compares the prevalence of 6 media frames which are commonly used when covering serious conflicts, including disasters. And the period for the coverage will be from 11th March to 30 September. Unlike earlier studies where disaster-related issues are covered using the conflict and attribution and responsibility frames, this study finds the prominence of human interest, economic consequences, and morality frames, partly highlighting the gravity of the disaster, as well as the country's inability to respond on its own. So it had to call upon actors both from locally and internationally, and also sufficient effort to replace the attribution of responsibility and the conflict flame so as to marshal enough support for response. Next slide, please. And the aim of the presentation is to highlight the study findings so as to draw recommendation to inform media coverage in disaster these days. The scope is as highlighted, and critical will be the findings and the recommendations. For the background, Malawi is a vulnerable country to disasters due partly to its location. It is located along the Great African Rift Valley, which has a great catchment for water, and the lake itself, the levels affect the hydrology of the region. And the associated human risk activities have been cultivation in the riverbanks and the cultivation closer, as well as the settlement closer to the river line and the watershed areas, which has resulted in disturbed hydrological patterns. The post 2019, after the floods in 2019, indicates that Malawi is vulnerable to floods, cyclones, as well as drought. And the disaster, as they happen, they draw a lot of attention, and they are subject for hard news because of the conflict, human conflict involved, the multiplicity of actors it attracts, as well as the conflict generated within the society. And according to previous scholars, they understand that lack of inquiry in disaster management and risk communication risks continuation of practices that do not only slow down the disaster response program, but they also cripple successive response and recovery. Next slide, please. Origin of Cyclone Freddy. Cyclone Freddy is known to severe tropical cyclone, and the longest, for that matter, which traversed the southern Indian Ocean for more than 5 weeks. It is recorded to have started northwest of Australia and traversed the Indian Ocean to reach the mainland Africa, making a landfall on 10 March 2023 in Malawi. Each fall in Malawi resulted in heavy rains, high winds, significant flooding, as well as bursting of river banks and landslide in most of the southern Malawi districts. Blantyre, Zomba, and Palombe were the mostly hit districts. The results of Cyclone Freddy resulted in death of human death. About 1,200 individuals were killed. About 1,704 people were injured. There was also death of around 200,000 livestock and injury of around 91,000 livestock. Further 5,000 plus people were displaced into 550 camps spread across the 13 districts of southern Malawi. There was further destruction of road networks and interruption to school calendar that resulted from the effects of cyclone. And until now, the country is grappling to deal with some of these effects. Next slide, please. And on television, why television? Television has been identified by the Malawi media landscape report as the most reliable medium of information to urban working people in Malawi, the most second important source of information for young men, women, as well as marginalized groups. And television outlets in Malawi, generally, they are classified under 4 categories: public, private commercial, private religious, and community-owned. And for the interest of the study, it concentrated on public and the private commercial television outlets. And several scholars have attempted a distinction between public media and private commercial, notably Aki Asano, Tanga, and Tanaka, 2023. They highlight that public media are expected to be neutral, impartial, well-financed. However, they are mostly pro-government and elitist, whereas the private commercial have been known to provide alternative voice, and on the criticism, they are ideologically biased, they are profit-oriented, popularistic, and they have been assessed to lack genuine public interest so that they obtain profits. This is according to Manhan and Singer 2018. Next slide, please. So television overall is known to be very crucial in disaster management communication, as it is for early warning, whistleblowing, as well as it's an important tool for measuring disaster recovery initiative and response, both locally and internationally. So the reason why this study was undertaken was, while the role of television has been recognized in the country as well as globally, the study on how the coverage in Malawi is reportedly ad hoc and has been lacking in depth. Several attempts, several scholars have undertaken this from a political point to understand how political narratives are framed, but specifically on disaster management, this aspect has been lacking. Most of the information is sponsored, is a paid product which is produced somewhere, and the framing itself has not generated sufficient coverage or study although disaster issues in Malawi keep coming year after year. Next slide, please. So the coverage frames of disaster, according to Sama and Raleigh 2013, indicates that it depends on the magnitude of devastation as well as the political environment. That is why this study was undertaken in order to see what was the coverage like and under which political environment the coverage was done. Could it be different if it was a different political environment? Those are some of the issues that it intended to answer. For the research objectives, it intended to achieve 3, which was to assess the prevalent media frames, to examine the major news sources, as well as to compare the frames across state and the private-owned media outlets. Next slide, please. For the methodology definition for a media frame, according to Enterman 1993, is defined as a process of making certain aspects of an occurrence more salient to promote a particular problem definition, causal interpretation, moral evaluation, as well as or a treatment to influence public perception of an issue. The frame itself is a central organizing idea on how that item, that issue, or that news is going to be passed on to the audience. And for media framing studies, these are works which analyze how issues have been packaged to influence a given line of thinking to the audience through the use of various frames. So to achieve this, the paper undertook a qualitative analysis on the media frames that were used in the coverage of Sargon Freddy, and borrowing from the works of Smeteko and Enterman, Devastri, and Bumgarden. The 6 frames were identified, such as the attribution of responsibility, where the work looked at whether an individual or an actor was given a responsibility for failing to or for facilitating the achievement of a given objective. And on the human interest, this looked at the use of human experience and the narratives to achieve the given discourse, to portray a given angle of the issue. Then morality, this referred to whether moral aspects or the reference to God or any other religious being was referred in the coverage of the cyclone. Economic consequence, this was the economic loss or results after the hit of the disaster. And for the conflict, this was the disagreement generated within the responding actors or those that are believed to have taken part in involvement as the issue was covered. And international interest frame, taking the understanding that Malawi was unable to deal with the disaster because of its gravity, was considered to look at the core and the response of the international partners to respond to the occurrence. And the unit of analysis for the first 5 media frames, as highlighted, was a paragraph within a news item, whereas the whole article was considered for the international interest frame. Next slide, please. And the sampling, the news scripts from both Malawi Broadcasting Corporation, Times, and Zodiac Television were obtained. The sampling period was from 10 March to 30 September. And the total population of the articles retrieved was 372. However, the initial assessment indicated that some of these articles were either opinion pieces, commentaries, as well as updates, which could not form proper news items, news scripts. And also a consideration was done on the length of the piece. Those with less than 4 lines, 4 sentences were discarded, thereby remaining with 160 news items, representing 78.05% of the population of the sampled scripts. So simple random sampling was conducted to select items from Zodiac and Times, as these had more news items from the retrieved database than that of Malawi Broadcasting Station, which had news items totaling to 8. Next slide, please. On the key findings from the slide, we can see that human interest was top in both Malawi Broadcasting Station coverage as well as on the private media outlets. We also note that economic consequences
Sorry, Pastor, you have 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. Economic consequence was also high, and the morality was also high on the coverage. We may check the attribution of responsibility is high on the Malawi Broadcasting Station because it was positive attribution to say government was doing something, whereas it is low on the other one as they avoided representing the conflict within the fighting, so that they marshal a lot of support from both locals and the international. Next slide. So the key findings as highlighted, the human interest was more prominent, and the attribution of responsibility as well as international interest frame were featured list with 25 and 22 appearances because of avoiding the attribution of responsibility avoided to bring the conflict within, so that they discourage people from responding, whereas international interest frame, it was because the whole of an article was considered. That's why it features less. Next slide, please. And for the media sources, the study finds that Malawi Broadcasting Corporation built its narrative around the person of the president, vice president, and the government ministers and district commissioners, whereas Zodiac coverage was based mostly on government line agencies and their work, and not given personalities. The work of local and international organizations was also emphasized, and not individuals within those international organizations. Next slide, please. For the Times Television, the sources mirror those of Zodiac Television. However, there was more prominence of political actors, especially those from the opposition, aspirant, religious groups, as well as the other partners. That's why we could see that a bit of conflict frame was more pronounced with Times Television. Next slide, please. So on recommendation, much as there is I would say an expired communication policy for the Department of Disaster and Management, which was developed in 2012 and it's expired in 2018. There's need for a policy that aligns practices, and these practices are to benefit the disaster victims and emphasizing who was responding. This is going to ensure protection against misinformation, as well as severe sensationalization of news, as the people would want to claim the coverage or the assistance which is coming in, instead of emphasizing the suffering that is happening and the benefit for coming in to assist. Then they also need for encouraging media accessibility to all. We could conclude from the coverage that Malawi Broadcasting Station centered on the authority and the government of today, whereas the others sought a voice from the private media. Next slide, please. On the finding, also believe that the study has potential to inform disaster coverage training, where it is victim-centered rather than actor-centered, with potential of improving disaster coordination, improving objectivity and responsive to the community needs, as well as reducing the friction between state and private commercial media for the fight of profit. The study further may improve initiatives by media houses themselves, not only to be a medium for airing paid content, but to generate programs to respond to the threat of disaster as it is recurrent within the country. It's also further important to encourage more scholarly inquiry into the media frames for covering disasters in Malawi, especially the visual frame, which I believe is also a neglected area. Next slide.
Prescott, just to remind you to conclude, please. Thank you.
And the last slide is that the work has been very important in the study of the disaster, as the disaster is an emerging issue within Malawi, and every year we anticipate an occurrence such that it will require informed policies, practices, as well as academic inquiry for it to be very purposeful and very directed to those that are victims than concentrating on the actors' interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Prescott. Thank you for your presentation. It was very insightful. We can continue with the discussion. There are some questions from the audience. So the first question is it appropriate for disaster coverage to be determined by the magnitude of devastation, or should there be uniform coverage regardless of the scale of the disaster?
I believe in essence that may not be avoided, where a magnitude of something will attract more coverage or more consideration. However, it is the wish of the study that the coverage is leveraged, that it becomes a culture, that something when it occurs, when a disaster happens, is given the necessary attention so that there is a sufficient response to the victims.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, as you have mentioned, the human interest frame was dominant across all outlets. Do you attribute this to editorial preferences, audience expectations, or any cultural factors that are specific to Malawi?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part of the question.
You have mentioned in your findings that the human interest frame was dominant across all the outlets of all the media and news outlets.
Yes.
How do you attribute this finding?
I think the use of the human interest was because of the magnitude of the disaster. It was by bringing personal stories and personal experiences of the victims that it was thought to attract more attention and immediacy in terms of those responding. However, all the other frames are equally important depending on the end state that as a country or as a responding actor would want to achieve. However, by emphasizing a given personal narrative, you may end up neglecting other people who may not express the experience better than the others. So there's need of balancing in terms of reporting so that we respond effectively when such things happen. Thank you so much.
One last question, thank you. One last question from the audience. Did social media play a role as a source of news in regards to the information of disaster?
Yeah, that is a very good question. Social media really played a role, both positive and negative. There was I think there was too much information flowing, such that there was a potential to confuse even those that are planning to respond. However, it helped in mapping the extent of the disaster so that the areas are known and the appropriate kind of assistance was directed. There was an instance where certain elements, certain individuals had to post a video of people who had died, and there was less response from one of the district. So it had to take individuals to say, you are neglecting us here. Maybe you have to come and direct that. So social media has been very critical, but as the normal, social media has to be managed properly if it is to help, to be of help when dealing with such cases. Thank you so much for such a question.
Thank you, Prescott, once again for your presentation. It has been very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So now we will move forward with the next presentation by Oluwatobiloba Elizabeth, with a presentation titled The Impact of Teachers' Psychosocial Well-Being on the Transition to Schools into Learning Communities. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yona. All protocols observed. My name is Oluwatobiloba Arebeshola, and I'm excited to be here. This is a very beautiful opportunity to present my research. So I do greet everyone on the platform. Yeah, like she earlier mentioned, my research focused on the impact of teachers' psychosocial well-being on the transition of schools into learning communities. Please, next slide. Okay. All right. So the content is fine. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So I'll be, this presentation will cover the introduction briefly, the literature review methodology, results and discussion, as well as the summary and conclusion. Next slide, please. Yeah, let's get down to business. The landscape of education is undergoing a paradigm shift, which is influenced by globalization, increase in online learning, evolving societal needs, and artificial intelligence, or what is known as machine learning today. This paradigm shift is accompanied by an increasing emphasis on the transformation of schools into learning communities. What are the features of a learning community? A learning community is characterized by collaborative efforts among educators, fostering a culture of shared responsibility, continuous professional development, and a focus on student-centered learning. The success of this transition is crucial for creating dynamic and adaptive educational environments that meets the needs of 21st century learners. Next slide, please. Now, within this, thank you. Within this context, the psychosocial well-being of teachers emerges as a pivotal yet underexplored factor influencing the successful evolution of schools into learning communities. Psychosocial well-being encompasses the emotional, social, and psychological aspects of an individual's life, reflecting their overall mental health, job satisfaction, and interpersonal relationships. The well-being of teachers is intimately connected to their ability to navigate the complexities of the modern educational landscape, affecting their resilience, engagement, and effectiveness as educators. Therefore, understanding how the emotional and psychological state of teachers influence their commitment to collaborative endeavors, adaptability to change, and willingness to engage in continuous professional development is essential for orchestrating a successful school transition. Next slide. So we have the research objectives and research question, but I'll just read out the research questions. This research seeks to answer the following questions. 1, how does the psychosocial well-being of teachers influence their commitment to fostering a learning community within a school setting during periods of transition? 2, what are the key psychosocial factors that impact the successful transition of schools into learning communities? And 3, in what ways does the psychosocial well-being of teachers affect the development of collaboration among educators during the transition of schools into learning communities? Next slide. Yeah, the ecological systems theory has been adopted in this study because the study aims to examine the broader context and how various environmental factors, such as school policies, leadership, and peer interactions impact teachers' psychosocial well-being and subsequently the transition of schools into learning communities. Ecological systems theory, proposed by Uri Bronfenbrenner, emphasizes the interconnectedness between individuals and their environment. It is applied in this study to understand the complex interactions between individuals and their environment in various contexts, including education, and how the psychosocial well-being of teachers is influenced by various systems, the microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, and macrosystem, without leaving out school structures, policies, and societal factors. And how all of these now, in turn, affect the transition of learning communities. Next slide. These scholars listed here and others not highlighted here provided information that is important for the overall study and gives a detailed description of the key ideas, theories, and factors that influence the psychosocial well-being of teaching staff and the role they play in transforming school districts into learning communities. Next slide. This study is conducted as a systematic review. This approach is particularly suitable for this study as it provides a holistic analysis of the existing research. The study's review process followed 3 stages as outlined by Kitchenham 2007. The first stage is planning. This stage involved selecting databases, defining inclusion and exclusion criteria, and determining categories for analysis. The second stage is the review process. During this stage, the study selected journals and studies, extracted data, and synthesized the findings. And lastly, the review report. The study analyzed the results and discussed the findings in relation to the initial research questions. The population of this study are academic research articles on teacher psychosocial well-being, school transition, and learning communities. The research samples came from articles published in the journals on education and psychology between 2019 and 2024, Teaching and Teacher Education and Educational Research Review. Next slide. For the inclusion and exclusion eligibility, timeline, language, and document type was used as criteria. Hence, articles, no, this is not the next slide. The previous is the previous one. Yes, thank you. Yeah, for the inclusion and exclusion eligibility, timeline, language, and document type was used as criteria. Hence, articles were restricted to only those published between 2019 and 2024. So any article before 2019 was excluded. Also, only articles published in English was included in the study. And finally, only journals with empirical data was included. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. The key instrument of information gathering in this research is the data extracting sheets designed in Microsoft Excel. This form was utilized to gather all necessary details from the included studies, including but not limited to authors' names, study design, total number of participants, outcomes assessed, major outcomes, and conclusions. The data extraction form was tested with a pilot test for its validity, and the quality assessment tool for studies with diverse design, QATSD, was used to evaluate the quality of the reviewed articles, and the papers with various research designs were compared using it critically. Next slide. Thank you. The preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis, PRISMA, was used as guidelines and checklists for reporting the reviews. The diagram shows how articles were retrieved and screened using the inclusion and exclusion criteria to arrive at the 31 studies that was included in the review. Next slide. It is worthy of note that this research looked at the characteristics of the reviewed studies as well as the profile and assessed its quality before arriving at the summary of findings. Next slide. To answer the first research questions, we found out that psychosocial well-being and teachers' commitment to building and maintaining a learning environment are intimately and multifacetedly linked. Teachers' psychological well-being is crucial to the development of innovative learning resources, so they must be supported accordingly. In addition, the cultural values and the leadership of the school, teachers' willingness and motivation, the availability of educational resources, and interventions also can either mediate or moderate this relation. And finally, teachers' psychological well-being can be affected by satisfaction, stress, and workload perceived. and which consequently can deteriorate their performance. And on to research question 2, we found several psychosocial factors that impact the successful transition of schools. And these include supportive work environment and leadership, recognition, appreciation, and professional growth, social support and collaboration, dedication and positive work-related mental states, workload tensions and shared learning tensions, psychological factors, professional development and growth, and finally, emotional well-being and mental health. And the last question, we found that among the characteristics shared by teachers who participated in professional development, a shared school vision is the common trait of their commitment to creating a learning community. In fact, those who feel morally obligated to raise their own teaching quality and to master new methods take up learning opportunities driving the educational culture. And lastly, evidence of commitment in teachers is expressed when they have active participation in professional collaboration, forming stronger relationships with their peers and the development and implementation of projects. Next slide. Conclusion. From articles analyzed, it was realized that teachers' well-being is a global problem, and the psychological health of teachers was observed to be a strong predictor of their motivation and the success of their teaching careers. This research also revealed that school environments can have a moderating impact on the connection between well-being and commitment. Based on the findings of this study, several recommendations can be made to support teachers' psychosocial well-being and facilitate the transition of schools into learning communities. First, leaders of schools who show a supportive, empowering leadership style can direct the creation of a school culture that values teacher well-being and encourages collaboration. Second, schools should create a professional development program aimed at boosting the teachers' level of well-being and building their collective capacity. These can involve stress management, emotional intelligence, and communication competences. Third, peer support among teachers could result in an emotional support network as well as a constructive collaboration avenue. Fourth, realizing and rewarding the work of teachers in building learning communities, in turn, might be useful to increase their self-worth and instill the drive. Fifth, schools need to have various options available for teachers to maintain their well-being, such as a counseling service, programs for well-being, and flexible work schedules. And lastly, schools should provide clear communication channels that will aid collaboration besides preventing faulty communication, which is one of the key stress contributors. Next slide. Thank you. Despite an extensive and systematic search of the literature, there might be some key studies that were not included in this study due to the inclusion and exclusion criteria, which limited the search to English language peer-reviewed papers published in the last 5 years. Besides, the lack of time did not allow the examination of all possible sources or viewpoints available. Hence, further investigation into this area may be conducted to identify the strategies and interventions that greatly contribute to the psychosocial well-being of teachers and the networks being built in learning communities. In addition, longitudinal studies should be conducted to check the effect of teachers' well-being on students' long-term outcomes and the general performance of learning environments. And lastly, comparative research across different educational systems and cultures can provide certain insights into the factors of the social school environment that promotes students and teachers' development. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was indeed an interesting research. We can get started with the discussion. So there is one question from the audience. The question is, does personality have any impact on the psychosocial aspect in this context? And does it require conscious adaptation efforts to enhance its effectiveness?
I didn't get the second part of the question. And does it what?
And does it require conscious adaptation efforts to enhance its effectiveness?
So
Personal
qualities can influence teachers' motivation towards building themselves up. So if you have if you're generally laid back, you're not concerned about your personal development, then there's nothing the school environment or the external factors can do. And I think that has to be that is also related to Urey's theory. You know, when you look at this various system, the microsystem has to do with your personal self and your immediate environment. That's your family, your background, how you grew up. You know, these factors also influence how you react to the transition of schools into learning communities.
Thank you. So I have a question for you.
Okay.
Did your systematic review reveal any gaps in the existing literature that could potentially inform future studies?
Yes, the gaps that we actually identified was that even though the literature review covered the different aspects of the research, there was actually no literature review that looked at the impact that the teacher psychosocial well-being actually have on that transition process. So I found literatures that dealt with the psychosocial well-being of teachers. I found literatures that dealt with school transformation, and I found literatures that covered learning communities, but there were no literature that actually looked at how the state of the teachers, how their own well-being would impact the movement of that transition. So in fact, one of my further research, if I were to do PhD, would be looking into that aspect actually, because that was what I discovered in the gaps. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So we have some more questions from the audience. What role does the educational syllabus play in providing an environment for learning communities?
Okay, so I would say that the school syllabus would not directly impact learning communities. What fosters learning communities is shared responsibilities. It's teachers coming together to look at the syllabus now and discuss it. So in that professional learning communities, you can have forums where teachers come together to discuss the syllabus and look at how effective it is. But the syllabus on its own, as an entity or as a document, does not have a direct influence on learning communities.
Good question. Thank you for answering. What role will the reward system and punishment play in the psychosocial well-being of teachers and students?
Oh, who doesn't like rewards? Imagine you being told you're getting $5,000 for, curating this event or this research. You'll be excited. You want to do it next time. So rewards are age-long boosters of motivation. Yeah, you reward me for doing something fantastic. I want to keep it up. I'll be excited. I know not only that it's going to tell me that it is relevant and it is appreciated, I'll also know that, okay, it actually had an impact for you to feel it worthy to reward me for it. So if you're considering rewarding your staff or your teachers, please go ahead. It will really boost their motivation and dedication to work.
Thank you very much. Thank you for answering all of the questions. Your presentation was very good. I want to thank both of the presenters for their participation and their research. So for now, we will have a short break. Dr. Cavadia?
Yes, hello again. We concluded also this session. Thank you very much, Dr. Colandri. We will stop for a short break. We'll be back around 2 o'clock with a plenary presentation. Thank you very much and join us again in a few minutes.
So welcome back everybody from our short break. Now we will start with the last plenary session of the day. I am happy to introduce Mr. Wes Nolan, the program leader and lecturer for media production at Liverpool John New University. Wes has a lot of expertise from the creative industries into the classroom, where he's dedicated to transformative experience design. His research investigates the transformative impact of higher education on first-generation creative industry students and focuses on how practical collaborative learning environments inspire deep perspective shifts. Today, Wes will be sharing insights from his study and introducing his innovative contributions to curriculum design. The floor is yours, Mr. Nolan.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, I'm good. I'm not going to get that horrible. You're muted. Shout in 2 minutes. I'm going to try and share my screen, and it actually made me smile when I saw that video because they're using the word transformative in that promotion for Unicaf, and that really kind of feeds into what I've been exploring and what I'd like to talk to you guys about. So I'm hoping you can see my screen. You should see a slide, kind of navy slide with Trans Ed written on it. Yeah. Okay, good. So this is where we're going to end, and I'm going to tell you how I got here. So this is the frame of reference model for education design that I'm starting to talk about. In relation to creative industries, education design and delivery, there are 3 key transformation frames of reference to consider: the social frame, the learning frame, and the career frame. Looking through these frames, there are 3 key perspective development bands: journey, position, and options with supports. Bands is important as it is an important identifier to acknowledge that we have a bandwidth. Also, within those, I wanted to keep it simple so people would remember it. So there's 3 key aspects to consider here. There's your social journey, your position, and options with support. Then there's your learning journey, position, options with support, career, journey, positions, options with support. That's just 100 words, and it took me about a decade to get to it, which is crazy. And I'm going to show you how I've gotten to there. This is part of my doctorate work. It is, I think my examiners are being confirmed this week, so I'll be going into Viva soon. So your comments and feedback today will be very helpful, but also I'm looking for collaboration and ways of getting this out there. The other thing that I arrived at, which surprised me as well, is a 13-step transformation system. Now, I've designed this with creative industry students in mind because that's where it came from, but I think it can be applied to any subject, as can anything that I'm talking about today. I do apologize for all the black on the white text. That's something I'm very much against as a presenter, and that's way too much text as well. But I just kind of needed to give you little snapshots into where we're going to go. I will jump around with some video, and I want to show you the in vivo interface as well, as I've used it. In an ideal world, I would chat to you as we go, but I do believe that the format is me to chat to you for about 30-40 minutes, and then there's going to be time for questions at the end. So please do take notes, because I think there's a few aspects to this that people will be interested in. One of them might be how I've used moving image into research design. The other might be reflexive thematic analysis, which is I adapted from Braun and Clark. There's obviously transformative learning theory with Mesereau as well is in here. And then there's the next steps, which is where I want you guys to kind of contact me and help get this work out there, okay? So, an inciting incident. Now, when we get into Mesereau stuff, we'll show you that in these 10 perspective phrases, it always began with a disorienting dilemma. And over the years, I've realized that it's not always a negative reason to get started on your educational journey. So I've borrowed some terminology from our friends in script writing and storytelling, to be fair. So it's always an inciting incident that gets the hero active. Orientation, objective setting and identifying supports. Reflective inward pondering. reflexive outward pondering, and I'll delve into what these mean and how they can be used later. Acknowledging reflective and reflexive strengths, identifying lessons from negatives. Reorientation through short, mid, and long-term objective adjustments in response to steps 3 to 5. So it's important to take stock of where you are and set strategies for how to get to the next stage. Build and engage with your network of personal and social supports. Build and engage with your network of career and craft supports. Plan and dedicate time to craft and career-specific skill sets. Plan and dedicate time to transferable skill sets. Conscious effort to experience roles outside of your comfort zone. Conscious effort to apply social learning and career gains to new challenges. And then number 13 is very important. It's gratitude. Now, I designed this with creative industry students in mind because obviously I am one. It is my area. But it also, I think, would apply to other areas. And in an ideal world, what I'd like to do with this next is develop it into an app so that students could use it as they go. And I argue that with this system, we could give students, even in very large cohorts, a personal experience. It gives them a personal kind of, we don't often teach people how to learn and what are the important stages to learning. And it's easy to get lost when you don't have a why and a waypoint. So I think this system could give you that. Okay, so what's the why of all of this? Alongside of my research, so I'm not joking when I say I've been doing this for a decade. Sometimes it feels like a click of a fingers, and other times it feels really long. But what happened alongside of what I've been doing is Braun and Clark's reflexive thematic analysis really enabled me to tell the story the way I'm going to tell it to you today and the way it is currently in my thesis. I struggled at the beginning because the education is quite personal to people, I believe. Ken Robinson is a kind of an inspiration of mine in this field. And he's the reason I'm talking to you today, actually. I wouldn't be here unless I was lucky enough to meet the guy as well back in London. In the summer, this summer of July, I was lucky enough to be on a writing retreat that was organized by John Moores University. This was my desk. It was my favorite corner. I realized that sun didn't hit that corner of the desk during the day, so I didn't have to move like most people. But when I was sitting there on a sunny July, kind of cool inside that library, I got a text message from home to say that my cousin had passed away, same age as me, and he was found dead in his hallway. He had overdosed. He was struggling a lot of his life since his father passed away. And it really resonated with me because my own father passed away 3 or 4 years ago as well. 4 years ago, actually, December 4th coming now. His name was Bernard. It's important to say the name of those that you lost. You die twice, they say, when you pass and when your name is last said. So I do dedicate the thesis to my dad as well. So why was I sitting in a library that would cost all of Trevor's social welfare checks for a month probably? And he was in a very bad situation at home and his whole family were. The reason is education. I was the last generation to be physically and mentally abused by the Christian Brothers in Ireland in the school system. It was a very brutal school system. They were very heavy on corporal punishment. They were very heavy on, especially if you were creative. There was one instance I remember where Brother Gibson, we had a thing called a free class, and he found me writing lyrics and poetry in my notebook, and he decided to read it out loud to the classroom, make fun of it, and then he made me kneel on 2 Bibles in the corridors for the whole day while people passed out of their classrooms and things, you know. So that was a kind of education system I was in. So I was never going to do any more education. In fact, I only finished. In Ireland, the last thing you do at secondary school is the leaving certificate. You're around 17, 18. On the way into secondary school as well, they don't tell you about this, but they throw you into a gymnasium one cold day and they test you. And based on those tests, they will put you into A3, A2, or A1. The part of the town that I was from as well, so this is Wexford on the bottom end of Ireland here in the southeast. Very beautiful town, beautiful beaches, but not much to do when you're a creative. That I still argue that the town needs a university with what I know now to kind of bring some life into it. But my parents and their parents, everybody would have left school when they were like 10, 12, and they would have worked in kitchens or building sites. When I was a teenager, I worked on deep sea trawlers, and in the top of our housing estate as well, there was a laundry. And when I left school, I worked there for a long time, but I was always been driven crazy by storytelling, and I was playing music at the time. So after about 2 years of that, I went to Dublin. It was a big deal to leave the family, my mom especially. I felt like I was kind of going against the family to do that and to be there. She felt she was failing as a mother. That was the power of the Catholic Church and the small communities in Ireland at the time, but I still had to go. I had to do it. Now, the next chain of events I'll spin through quite quickly, and you might be thinking, why am I telling you all this? And it is actually really important in terms of how this research came about and how I understand and how I write about transformative education from a position of having actually lived through it. So I go to Dublin, I was couch surfing, played some music, and I found a part-time sound engineering course. My brother had been in an accident, and he'd give me some money, and it was the only money I didn't spend before I got to this point where I found this sound engineering course in the newspaper. I'm interested in sound. What will that be like? Every Saturday we went into a sound studio. It was a real posh studio, big pianos, amplifiers, all the microphones and guitars you could think of. But the educators were treating me like a normal person. They weren't shouting at me all the time. They weren't making fun of me that I couldn't read properly. They were encouraging us to use the gear. And for some reason, everything they said to me, and I'm still like that today, by the way, if you try and teach me about a car or mechanics, it goes in one ear out the other. But everything to do with media really sticks with me. At the end of that part-time course, they suggested Coláiste Dúlaigh to me, which was a course that wasn't looking at UCAS points. It was based on a portfolio and an interview. So at that point, I got a portfolio together that summer, cobbled together any photographs I had of being in bands, any demos we had done, took photography, all that kind of stuff, did some paintings over the summer as well. And I interviewed, and I didn't realize how lucky I was to get in, because it absolutely transformed my life many times over. I wasn't the weirdo in the town anymore. There was 50 people in the room who were creatives like me, and we were being encouraged to be creative, and we were being told that we could actually get jobs and things, you know. The word mortgage and career was never said to people like me in school, especially from the part of the town that I was from, which would be considered, ironically, an area of social deprivation, but I think socially we were very strong, but economically not so much. So working hard in that college and chasing people down corridors when they were doing guest lectures led me into the industry. That industry and the involvement with the college actually led to them asking me to teach there as well. So I never wanted to teach after having that bad experience, but I did go back and tried it out because Kev can be very persuasive. Kevin White believed in me, and I loved it. I fell in love with teaching. So at this point, in Dublin, we're coming up to 2008 and the recession hits. So what am I going to do? I lost the creative industries work and I lost the teaching job. So I went and did a master's in Derry, Northern Ireland. Around that time, there was a clip for Sir Ken Robinson. Now, at the end of this, I pulled on some industry contacts after that master's, and I went to London. And this is where I get back into education, because Sir Ken Robinson was doing a talk. Now, I've gone through back in transmissions in sports. I'm not a fan of sports really, but sports broadcasting at least was creative industries. So I'm in London. Sir Ken Robinson's videos were inspirational to me. I hear that he's speaking at a conference called Learning Without Frontiers. So I go to that conference. I lied and said I was a student to get in there. And when I went in, I think I spent my last 200 quid or something of the month on a ticket for it, and then starved for the last 2 weeks. And I go to this 2-day conference called Learning Without Frontiers in London in 2012. While I was there, Noam Chomsky spoke at it. Sir Ken Robinson was going to be there. The best job title I've ever heard, the president of Lego, was there. And he did some experiments about creativity and learning. But one thing really stuck with me, and I usually tell people about this, but I can actually show you the clip because I found it this morning and I cut it for you to hear. Hopefully you got sound on this as well.
But I want to end by echoing what Ellen MacArthur said yesterday about a sustainable future. We need a change in priorities and perspective, and soon, if all the world's people are to benefit from our present knowledge and from the further breakthroughs that this century will bring. It's urgent to apply new technologies optimally and to avoid their nightmarish downsides, to stem the risk of environmental degradation, to develop clean energy, and to ensure that we don't, in 2050, still have a world where billions live in poverty and the benefits of globalization aren't fairly shared. We need to broaden young people's sympathies in both space and in time, so that they act as global citizens and perceive themselves as part of a long heritage and stewards for an immense future. I'll close with a personal perspective which strikes me whenever I visit a cathedral. This is Ely Cathedral. The builders of this cathedral lived in the fens. They'd probably mainly never been more than 100 miles. Even the most educated of them knew of nothing beyond Europe. They thought the world was a few thousand years old and that it might not last another 1,000. But despite these constricted horizons in both time and space, despite the deprivation and harshness of their lives, despite their primitive technology and meager resources, they built these cathedrals, though they knew they wouldn't live to see them finished. And their legacy still elevates our spirits nearly a millennium later. What a contrast this is to so much of our discourse today. Unlike our forebears, we know a great deal about our world, and indeed about what lies beyond. Many phenomena still make us fearful, but the advance of science spares us from irrational dread. We know that we are stewards of a pale blue dot in this cosmos, a planet with a future measured in billions of years, and its fate depends on humanity's collective actions this century. But all too often, focus is short-term and broken. We downplay what's happening even now in impoverished, far-off countries. We give too little thought to leaving a fair inheritance for my grandchildren. Widening these perspectives is surely prime educational goal. So that's my final thought. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that stayed with me for days. I couldn't think about anything else except what that man had said about the corner of the cathedral. So at this point, I've admitted that I'm not going to save the world with a song. So what is my part of the cathedral? So I'm working and living in London at this stage. We're doing Disney ESPN, working day shift, night shift, 1 hour commute either side of a 12-hour shift. Not fulfilled in any way. So what's my corner of the cathedral? Well, Kalash Dulig, media creative education changed my life. Is it like that for other people? Can I make it like that for other people, even if I can only do it for one other person to get them out of a small town situation like I was in? That has to be worth something. Okay, how do I get into education in the UK? I need a doctorate. What the hell is that? So that sent me on a journey to beginning the EdD in Bournemouth, which I'm currently finishing, EdD Creative and Education. So I'm going down to Bournemouth. It's a part-time thing. In the first year, I'm still working in industry. So I have a hunch, okay? So the hunch is that education can be transformative. It happened to me. And the word transformative kept popping up everywhere. This is from our current website at LGMU. And you'll notice that transforming is there. And even in the Unicaf clip that we saw before, I made a note and smiled that the word transformative and transform was in the copy across all the text. So my point is that's okay, but it needs to be more than just a marketing tool. We have to, if we can't tell somebody clearly what that is and how we're measuring that, I don't think we have a right to say that we're actually delivering it, because I don't think if we know what it is and can articulate what it is, we're not designing for it. And designing for it is the point I'm trying to make and where I'd like us to get to in terms of conversation, something to hang it on. I'm not saying I've solved all of this, but I do know from experience now that some of the things that I've found out really help the conversation, at least, and that we're actually talking about transformative. In the UK, the QAA guidelines, that word doesn't appear once. And the QAA guidelines are what guide what we do, what determines the levelness and appropriateness for education. Transformative isn't in there. I'm in Solent now. So what happened was I began the D, and about a year in, I was looking for work as a lecturer. So I'm in the industry looking in at the education. I need to get into education to kind of figure this out better. So every night shift, I'd be trawling the internet. One job finally came up that said it was willing to take an early career researcher that was just beginning their journey. Most places, I would say, teaching experience, great, had Dublin, industry experience, brilliant. I've got 20 years as a content creator, and then must have a doctorate. So Solent gave me a chance to get in, which was great because now I have a student body to work with. What I did was, working with my supervisors, we decided to focus it on first generation students, because I am one, and it helped me to narrow the sample. Now, how did I research it? So the urge as a creative to use video and move an image was huge. But it did open very, I think it's gotten a bit better in the last decade at least, but it opened a lot of doors to practice-led, practice-based, and all these different variations of that, which became a bit overwhelming in terms of rabbit holes of research. And I think there's a lot of pressure when you're doing this stuff part-time as well. You don't have days to spend or weeks or months to spend getting your head around this stuff. And the more I read about that, the less it was saying what I was doing. So I knew, coming from industry, and I have a documentary background as well, I know what kind of information you would get from what researchers would call a serial interview process. So I want to get some information from you. If I'm going to go and make a documentary, I'm going to have a camera operator, I'm going to have a sound operator, and I'll be the director. So there's 3 of us at least. You're going to organize your time around our time, and we're going to go to your house or somewhere, and we're going to pick a nice corner of a nice time of a nice day when you're in a nice mood, and we're going to record some stuff, maybe 20-minute conversation, which is a natural loop. I wanted to get away from that because the kind of transformation and transformative moments that I was aware of might be forgotten in a month or two when I go to visit you, or it might take a lot to tease out. And I wanted to try and capture those things as close as possible to when they happened. We all have devices now. The students would have laptops at Solent at the time. Some of them had camera phones and things like that. So I decided to use that to my advantage. I do have a clip here. So there was a point where I made a short video essay, and this is funny, my beard is going to disappear because it's nearly, gosh, it's mad seeing me in this clip now that I'm going to share with you. But it shows you what I did with the PonderLogic site. PonderLogic is the name I gave to the experiment, and there was a company in Canada that I used a little bit of hustle with to give me free access to the platform that they were at that time using at university. So they gave me X amount of space and X amount of units for the duration of my research, and that is the interface that you're about to see now. The next stage then was to get the participants onto the PonderLogic website itself. This was done via the email that they first responded with. The participant will get an invite from PonderLogic, and they will then be asked to set their own personal passwords. You can see I've got some supervisors here who haven't logged in yet. On the right-hand side here is the permissions. So this allows me as admin to restrict the access that participants have to each other's clips. It stops them from deleting things accidentally, moving things around, which I may not want them to do. So once they're signed up then, and I've given them a role, then they are free to go ahead and upload. A very simple interface. You choose your file, and below that is a title box. I did give participants guidelines on how I would like them to fill that out, and I'll talk about that in the next section. And below that again then was a really useful space for me to summarize the clips so you could tell at a glance what each one was. The very first element I uploaded to the site then was a PDF containing some general guidelines that I wanted the participants to follow. I wanted to take ownership of the file labeling convention because MediaCore would generate a set of random numbers each time you uploaded, and I thought that would get messy later on when I'm trying to deal with a lot of footage, a lot of different clips. So I wanted the participants to take ownership of the labeling. So PLP then is PonderLogic Pilot. The WN are my own initials, so this is Wes Nolan. And then the 0001 would be my first clip, and 0002 would be my second clip. So PLP, PonderLogic Pilot, WN, Wes Nolan, and the number of the clip. What that also meant then was that when a participant uploaded the clip, I would get an email from the site straight away telling me that somebody had uploaded. And for those 2 letters in the middle, I could tell exactly which participant had given me a new clip.
The other thing that I wanted people to look at was the two options for upload, which was closed and open. And then I wanted them to refrain from mentioning lectures and universities by name. So I wanted them to use things like my lecture or the university or my university. And then, of course, a little piece at the end, upload as often as you like. And I would say that in the clips as well to try and encourage use of the pilot site. So once the user had been invited, I hit my first ethical concern, if you like. I didn't want the participants to upload videos for other people to see, sensitive information at least for other participants to see. And I needed to test the control I had over those clips. So I just asked them to upload a quick 30-second clip to count to 30, just ream off numbers, anything at all, so that if somebody else did see it, they're not getting any information really.
1, 2, 3, 4. Test mode for under logic. Test. 13, 14, 15. How often do all these hairy faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week? Like us on Sunday nights? 28, 29, 30.
So once they all did that, I asked them then to confirm by email whether they could or could not see each other's work, and thankfully they couldn't see each other's work, so we could take it from there and we could start the pilot full. So what kind of questions was I going to ask? In formative assessment 2.1, which was about the design of the pilot study, I had a section in there where I proposed some kind of questions that I would potentially use in the pilot. So in the interest of synergy, I decided to start off with those question sets. So I would record a video from 3 bullet points. And then underneath that video, when I uploaded it, I would have the bullet points underneath so that once you'd reviewed the clip, you then had a short summary, which you could reference straight away without having to go back into the actual video.
I think my friends are finding it hard to find a career after uni. I've had a couple of friends that have done history degrees and others that have done teaching. A couple of them dropped out of uni because they just couldn't handle the workload. But the ones that have graduated studied history, and she's couldn't find any work to do with her job, so she's now just a carer. They seem quite surprised at all the experience that I'm getting in my job prospects.
And then compared to other people at home, my mate, what's he doing? History of politics. He doesn't want to be a politician, so what the hell's he going to do? Is like, I think I'm doing like live sound and sort of stuff like that, which I can go to live sound from it. So the course definitely relates to the job that I'll go into, which I don't think happens with a lot of other courses or necessarily other jobs.
If I hadn't have come to university, I'd probably still be trying to work in this industry, but I imagine myself trying to work in this industry without knowing what I've learned here at university, and I can only really see myself sort of floundering and sort of not doing a very good job, to be honest.
But it's also, I think it's important, especially in this industry, in the media technology industry, to get a degree, to get a job, because you've got to prove you learn them, as well as having experiences and stuff like that. And uni is a great way to get the experience through coursework and assignments, as well as them providing you with experience with festivals or stuff like that.
So as a method of recording, this works. It's doing what I expected it to do and a lot more, to be honest. The clips are coming in, the participants are recording, but it's in response to my own clips. I think sitting this side of the pilot, I think I was quite naive as to what my level of involvement was going to be. I think I was so caught up in the technical how-to, and the ethics was quite a frustrating period for me as well. I think I was so caught up with those things that I didn't look ahead and realize how big a role I would have to play in this. that the more clips I uploaded, the more responses I would get back. So that's been a huge learning curve that I'm definitely going to bring forward into the main project. It's important as well to acknowledge that I originally envisaged this to run from February for 8 weeks. I felt it needed 8 weeks because I wanted to see would participants become more comfortable with the process? Would they start uploading more? And they did. I ended up having to run from April, end of March, early April for 6 weeks. And coming near the end of the 6 weeks period, the participants were uploading outside of my prompts, outside of my clips.
I just got back from seeing my mates over Easter, and I don't know, it felt a bit weird. There was a lot of talk about what I'll be doing after uni, and had a lot of prospects, but compared to them, there's just, well, money-wise, there's a lot more for me that I can do, and I'll get a lot more opportunities than they thought I would. And yeah, they're a bit, they're happy, but it's a little bit awkward just because, well, in a year I'll be earning well over what they're earning already, and they've been working for 4 or 5 years already.
Here's a separate video you upload. Walking through the train station tonight, I didn't feel like a student, or not that type of thing, but it was really weird because I haven't been out in ages in Southampton with my friends, probably since before Christmas. But it's really weird because I suppose, I don't know, my nickname is Grandad. They call me Grandad, so I don't know if I'm just mature or whatever, or mentally or whatever, but I did all the nightclub stuff. I'd done all the freshers stuff last year, and to be honest, that was enough. But I don't know, I was just walking around the train station, everyone's going to the pub.
So not obviously groundbreaking at first glance, those 2 clips, but when you start to unpack them in relation to Jack Mesereau's transformative learning theory and perspective transformation, you then begin to see 2 students struggling with social divides between their own potential career projections and 2 people back home, and that causing a little bit of awkwardness there. And also a realization in maturity, having gone from 1 year to the next and taking on more professional responsibility. The next stage.
Okay, so those 2 clips, the last 2 were very important, and I wanted you to see a little bit of that journey from the pilot stage because it had a massive impact on the full study. So what I did was for the next full iteration, I spent months studying the students and uploading videos. We generated about 200 clips in total. And then I caught up with the guys 5 years after they graduated as well. And that's really when the penny started to drop and the frame of reference model and the 13-step transformation system really happened. It was really in that 5 year later catch up and the comparison of both. Where I started with this, I got a lot of philosophical overload when I was reading about transformative learning theory. I was going deep for hours and days and weeks, and I was coming back out of it with not much to use in the classroom. So I went all the way back to Mesereau's initial work in the 70s. And I really hung this research on the 10 perspective transformation phases that he had proposed. In order to do that, I looked at them across time because he did make some changes to them. So there's the 78 version, the 91 version, and the 94 version. And there's small changes across the way that I do unpack in the thesis. Things like adding religion and guilt and things like that didn't quite code. They were problematic in both the pilot stage and the later stage. And things like reflection, bizarrely, were missing because he talks about reflection a lot in his work, in his writing, but it's not in the 10 stages, 10 phases. And if you just read the 10 perspective phases on their own as well, they don't act as a guide. He's kind of saying in Mesereau's work, in the early work, he said that they were there, but we don't know how. He doesn't really write about what kind of the teaching methods were, what the subjects were. His initial study was to do with women going back into education in the 70s in America. So there was a whole initiative. It was quite a big sample actually that he had done. He had then noticed that at the time that his wife had seemed quite different and had experienced positive change, having been part of these reintegration programs. So for adult learning was his focus, but we never get a flavor of subjects and if some subjects were better than others, you know. So what did I do with all of this then? Let me see if I can get in Vivo onto that screen for you guys. Let me see if I can change this out. Yeah, Vivo up. I'm hoping by putting it on the same screen you can see it. Can you guys see in Vivo at the moment?
Yes, you can see it.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys have used in Vivo for data analysis. You get a little bit of a heart attack like this every time you update it because a decade of work seems to disappear. But basically over here is the 6 state phases that Braun and Clark proposed. Now, data familiarization for me just has a note inside of it because what I did as the video clips were coming in, I would use this notebook and I would make clip notes, and then upload on a Sunday another clip. And then at some point during the week, clips may or may not come back in, which was actually quite cool. Sometimes we're in a boring meeting and you get a little ping and you've just done some research, which felt good. The systematic for me, because I knew, and I probably went too hard on this, you know, I probably went too deep, drove myself a little bit insane. For me, I didn't just code to one version of the perspective transformation phase. I did all of them. So 78, 91, 94, you can see that I've been trying to code against them all. The things like turn to religion, the only reason that has 2 references in there is one of them is my video of asking about it, and the second one is the PDF. So anywhere where there was a 2, I got no codes against those things at all. In terms of systematic as well, my own research questions are in there. So there was a point where I asked them directly, do they understand the phases? So the students in the study, they didn't join a study about Mesereau's perspective transformation. I was exploring that. And at the very end of the journey, I asked them directly about it, and I had some interesting results as well. I asked them, does the definition that Mesereau had of transformation fit for them? And Aneta, one of the contributors, did say, wow, change is the only constant. And it was quite a profound thing that she had said and discovered for herself. Along the journey, then I start coding my own data. So part of the question that in my thesis is Mesereau stuff relevant, but also what else can I find from these students' journeys? So then the Braun and Clark stuff really fits in because I realized I was doing kind of phase 1 and 2 automatically, kind of instinctively, but their system gave me somewhere to go. Thematic analysis structure gave me a 3rd, 4th, 5th stage towards write-up. And you'll notice as well, anything and everything goes in here. Dead stress, you know, being first generation, still learning, all that stuff gets narrowed down into even further themes. The separation you're seeing here, this was the 2016 PonderLogic site. So all those 200 videos that we generated in the system that I showed you earlier was coded against all of this. And then later on, obviously, the participant interviewers. One of the weirder ones for me and one I tried to ignore was actually coding my own clips, which became a bit of an exercise. And I could see transformation in there as well, because don't forget, the strange meta layer to this is that being on a doctorate is transformation for me as well again. So being on the BA journey in Dublin and Coláiste Dhuibhligh changed my life. The MA helped during the recession, and then going on to the doctorate. Don't forget I started in industry at the beginning of this journey, and now I've been program leader at 2 higher education institutes in the UK, and I've led cohorts of hundreds, and I'm currently program leader at John Moores University. So that was enabled by me being on the doctorate. So there's this odd meta layer of coding yourself and your own journey against this stuff.
Sorry to interrupt you, Wes. You have almost 10 minutes left.
Yeah, that's no worries. So what happened then was There was a moment in the data, and it actually happened back at our friend in Gladstone's. So I'm hoping if I hide this, you'll see the PowerPoint again. You're seeing a lighthouse is my desktop, and you should see the lamp now, hopefully. Okay, so I had written in this book in 2017 when I was reading through transformative learning theory paperwork. There was a guy called Keegan, and he asked the question, what form transforms? And I had written down form. All I knew at that time was I was going to use that acronym, frame of reference model. And I've written down some funny things in this book, actually. I can see myself. One of the hard parts for me at the beginning of all of this was to allow my creative side into doctorate world. Even looking at that earlier video of myself, I can see him kind of presenting in a weird way. It's not as natural. It doesn't feel like me. But the more I went into this, because you do make up this odd, you over exaggerate what doctorateness might mean in the field, and I definitely overshot that a few times, and it is one of the weaknesses. I probably could have written my thesis up years ago. But also it is who I am as a researcher now. So in Gladstone's one day, I was sitting out in the sun enjoying it, and that question was still in my mind, what form transforms? And the frame of reference model for education design popped. And it's one of the strengths of having time to ponder. I think if I had done it sooner, it would have just been an essay and something that I was figuring out. I couldn't have done it from outside an industry. I had to be inside the education system. And I do think as well, the step ups I made from being a lecturer to senior lecturer, but also program leader, gave me that kind of organizational insight into how universities work and the structures work. So going back to what I shared with you earlier, in terms of the frames of reference, I did a little exercise to try and start figuring this out. So if you look at the social transformation frame here, reflexive thematic analysis, this could be from your team meeting. It could be from something that you've done, you could sit down with a group about a module even. And one of the things from my research was about support and understanding at home. Another thing was about relocating. Okay. D&D means development and design and delivery awareness. So if you consider that stage against awareness and suggestions, you then unpack and ask for things that can be put into your curriculums. So parents' experience might result in lack of home encouragement. We've all experienced that as first generation students. There's a bit of silence when you go home. People don't understand what you're doing. Even now, if I told people that I was a doctor, they'd ask me to fix somebody's leg or something. So it's never spoken about. It's like this kind of weird in between place. You might feel imposter syndrome within the new circles that you're being successful in, but then in the other one at home, you kind of hide your achievements. So you get this weird, odd thing. What can we do about that as educators, though, is the problem, is the key thing. Homesickness came up, employment pressures. So we can add these things to induction agendas. We can add them to personal tutor agendas. We can invite experienced students to assessment-specific workshops, bring them back, which we've done a lot. Encourage exploring these topics. In creative industries, you see, we can pick one of these areas and ask someone to do a documentary on it, either moving image or audio. Relocating as well. So self-identity, self-doubt, these things popped up. Okay, what can we do about it? Again, you can workshop ways of bringing it into your curriculum. So that's just one sheet. And even if I showed you the actual document, that one went on for pages, and it was just me trying to figure out some of these responses to the items that came up in my research for these students. And it took a long time, but I could imagine sitting in a room with people, which is what I want to do. My goal for this, by the way, would be some kind of an open source shared document somewhere that we could all look at. And if we had certain problems, how are we solving it? What kind of workshop things, what items are we doing? What can we give to each other that would lead to responses, I suppose, shared responses to similar, because as it's not just the first generational thing, it's a common thing for anybody coming into education, I think, to feel a little bit out, and more so these days with mental health issues as well. So when you workshop through all the various stages, it can help to what I feel like is a revolution that's needed, and that we're not going to be able to hide from much longer. So what I want to do as a kind of a wrap up, if I can, is the last thing that I saw at that, and it should be 3 minutes long if I can just quickly pull it up. Was that last clip for Sir Ken Robinson, and he, again, remember, he inspired me into this. If you haven't seen his 2006 talk on the how schools kill creativity, please do go and have a look at it. And these final thoughts, I think, are very, very important. And it's the inspiration that I got from London that time to go on this journey. So I'd like to share it with you.
The thing I just want to get to, though, is this, that there's often a tendency for people who work in education to believe there's nothing they can do. And I think the message of the conference ought to be there is everything you can do at whatever level that you operate. Politicians of all parties, and I live in America now, and I can tell you it's the case here, do have strong vested interests in education. They impose views and systems and cultures on education. It's what Gramsci would have called cultural hegemony. And you see it evidently in education. There is an attempt to impose a particular view of social values and of economic purposes on education, and then to support it with particularly regimes of standardized testing to try and to find if there's a way of making these aims kind of universally applicable and testable. The good news, though, to me is this, that education is not monolithic. And as I said before, it's not linear. Education is much more what's sometimes called a complex adaptive system. That really just means is that it's a system with many elements, many moving parts, many sometimes confluent and sometimes conflicting forces. It's like a vortex. It's not like an undisturbed canal. It's in many ways, it's like the open ocean. There are lots of forces and counter forces that run through education. And if you teach, you are one of them, and perhaps one of the primary ones. Everyone's agendas are in play in education, whether you're a politician, a student, a parent, or a teacher, or a school superintendent, or a CEO. There have been numerous attempts to impose cultures on education, but the culture itself is too complicated to simply give into it. There is inertia in the system, there is optimism, there's hope in the system, and all these things have to be taken into account. If politicians could control education, they would have done it before now. Actually, they can't, because the system doesn't quite work that way. So I think it's important to recognize that the revolution that we're discussing, as well as being urgent, is in process. And it won't come from the top. Revolutions never come from the top. They always come from the bottom. They come from grassroots movements of people doing what they think is the right thing in their current situation, but being part of a larger process of social change and connecting with others who are moving in the same direction. And the new technologies give us every opportunity to do exactly that. There are some principles, I just want to end on this. I think some principles that we might observe here. The first is that education will only work now and in the future if it is personalized. And we might talk more about what that really means, but we do have the tools now to contour education to every single student in the system. The technologies of gaming provide for that, but they're not the only ones. That the whole ethic, really, and drive of information systems is that you can personalize them to your own uses and your own interests. We never had that before. Secondly, we do have to customize education to the individual communities where it's actually taking place. I think this is really important, that for any given student, the education system is not what happens in the committee rooms in Westminster or in the committee rooms of our local authorities. The education system for any given student is the school they go to. That's it. Or in the classrooms they sit in. If you're a teacher, you are the education system. If you're a school head teacher, you're the education system for those kids. So you can change the world of education for them immediately if you choose to. And I think if enough of us do that, that adds up to a social movement. And that is what a revolution is in the end.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Wes, for your presentation. It was very informative. So I have a question. As you have mentioned, you are participating in the videos too, right? were your videos part of the analysis?
Yeah, that surprised me actually because as I developed, two important things happened. One, I realized that the questions themselves weren't important because the way this is, students would go on this stream of consciousness no matter what I asked. It was in the area, but it was a stream of consciousness that never kind of directly said yes, no to anything. And then the other thing from that was that, and it's why I started my experience, when I started sharing my experience of what I had been through in their position, they tended to open up more and say more things as well. And then because it was longitudinal with the 5-year distance for me as well, I coded some data to that too, because like I said, my journey is interwoven with this because even doing the doctorate actually is transformative, and you can pitch it against the 10 phases of perspective transformation as well, personally too. So there's always been this strange kind of, and it's why the reflexive angle of thematic analysis with Braun and Clark is important, because it acknowledges us as data generators and not just collectors.
I just wanted to ask, do you believe that your involvement in the videos did take the type of themes in a certain direction?
No, because once they start talking, one of Eddie's clips is 45 minutes. You could argue that certain aspects of it was, yes, but when you watch the clips, they don't seem led in any way, and sometimes they'll go way off. I'll ask these very specific things, and I'll get 30 minutes back on something that was bothering them that day about an ex-partner or a piece of equipment not working or something like that, you know. I was aware of it ethically, because I remember in one of Tom's earlier clips, he shared that he really enjoyed school and that school was a positive experience for him. And I was like, oh no, my research is over. Because and I think that was a learning journey for me as a researcher coming from industry, because I was obviously had confirmation bias to exactly my journey. But then I realized as well, and the other thing to say too, actually on that is I always had this kind of strange barrier to maybe it was just for widening participation or first generation or disadvantaged students, but actually people from more advantaged demographics similarly struggle because it was a creative course where the parents wanted them to do law or be medicine or something like that. So there was a lot of little bumps along that in terms of leading or biased or ethics or all that stuff. But it's another reason why the videos have value, because I would type in about my own self and my own perceptions too, you know, so.
Thank you for answering. I
worries.
think Dr. Papadopoulou has some questions.
Yes, actually, thank you very much, first of all, for the presentation. My first question actually ties in with your last comment as to why eventually you went for the first generation students, because you did say now, you know, that it was a dilemma and so on. So why did you finally end up only with the first generation students and not include the others as well?
I think, to be honest with you, it was a conversation I was having with supervisors, and it was because of my background was that. Two, it narrowed the focus a bit because remembering that it's a doctorate, so I'm trying to do some kind of research. And in a funny way, it was kind of, I ended up into the trap that a lot of people who write about transformative learning did. So if you look at transformative learning literature, it would be things like prisons or people recovering from, HIV studies and all this other stuff. So it was kind of, and what I learned later on is that I don't want to call it sample bias, but you kind of either subconsciously or consciously look for it where you think you're going to find it in a strange way. But it doesn't. One of the students heard it wrong, actually. She was actually a 40-year-old, but she wasn't first generation, but she's seen it as first generation in creative industries education. She didn't see it as actually the first in her family to go to education, because she later on shared that her parents had been doctors and teachers. And I was like, oh, hang on. But then that information became useful anyway in terms of coding the data, you know. The first instance was guts, and I know researchers don't like hearing that. It was just a good instinct to go down that way, which was supported by the supervisors that I had. But actually, to be honest, at the beginning, I thought I needed 50 or more participants. 10 finished fully, and the amount of data and time that I spent in vivo, if I had 50, I probably just would have walked away. I didn't realize or understand at the time how many hours I would spend going on the tiniest little things, you know, and almost with an awareness of I should walk away now, but maybe I'll use it later. So you end up with trees upon trees upon trees of coding data in vivo. But it was, yeah.
Yeah. Well, qualitative studies are always tricky. Right. And they do take quite a lot of time to complete. So, the next thing that I wanted to ask is, I think something that quite a lot of researchers, tap on, but don't pay too much attention to. Okay. When you're dealing with qualitative analysis in general, irrespective of what the study is about, the majority of the researchers neglect the most important thing, language use. Okay. And myself coming from a psychoneurolinguistic background, I can see how that affects, the analysis, because from the linguistic perspective, the psychoneurolinguistic perspective, you need to do specific analysis in order to determine what aspects should be included and which should not. There are specific triggers, linguistic triggers, that can show, let's say, the authenticity of the statement given by the participant, right? And some other extra linguistic aspects, like the facial expressions, raising the eyebrows, closing the eyes, the pauses, the field pauses, and so on, that could give you insights into whether what the speaker is saying is indeed true. Did you take any of this into account?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. There's so much in the bloody thesis. So I could have written 5. I could have even just done 1 on the analysis, and it was something I'd said to one of my supervisors very early on. Often the valuable stuff in terms of transformative is what they're not saying and how they're saying it. And I almost wanted it. One clip, Eddie's 13th clip, which he went on for about 45 minutes, became a chapter in itself because of all those things. Because the camera's rolling and he's just speaking online while he's arguing with somebody on Facebook, and then he's thinking and pausing and he's analyzing himself, and it's all that stuff. And it's very much like you say, in terms of the language, there was a big problem with Mesereau's perspective phrases, because the students did not understand the language of those phases at all. Some of them are quite complex and heady, which is something that I tried to steer away from when I got to my 13-step transformation, because it needs to be useful. It needs to be inclusive, not exclusive language, I think. So yeah, it'd be interesting for you to read the thesis and see those things. But it was the gift of video, was all those silences and pauses and all the inferences, and the stuff that's very hard to, it wouldn't read the same on a page as when you watch the clip,
Unless, of course, on top of all the analysis that you've done, you were doing, an actual transcription. So that would have taken you a few more months. But yeah, don't go down that road now. You've got the Viva to attend now.
Yeah, no, I did the transcriptions as well. Yeah, that was another month or 2 of life gone.
Yes. Yeah. I know the pain. Okay. I think I have no further questions at this point. Joanna, I don't know that there's any more from the audience.